American Comics. My Warhammer Simulator Chapter 501 to 520. Chapter 501. The Minotaur on Holy Terra. Shadow of the Regent. 9. Happy New Year. Open black lens bracket. Meanwhile, in the near-Earth orbit of Holy Terra. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. The massive iron fortress, the Phalanx, its dilapidated exterior covered in various battle damage marks, gradually activated a large number of its internal warp engines, heading to intercept the approaching naval fleet heading towards Terra. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Naval Marshal Perez, one of the traitorous High Lords, the only female High Lord in the Six Lords Alliance, was inside the Imperial Navy Emperor-class battleship, Supreme Bloodline. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. And in order to successfully take off the other party's head and casually play with it, you have already arranged several insurance measures in advance. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. The first insurance measure is that before the conservative faction launched the rebellion, a squad of Terminator bodyguards who secretly received your orders boarded the bridge in advance under the guise of protecting the naval marshal, and should now be standing quietly beside the naval marshal. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. The second insurance measure is, if the Terminator bodyguards, due to the continuous influence of many factors, fail to cut off the other party's head in the first instance, resulting in the Imperial Fist's Phalanx still engaging in a firefight with the naval fleet. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Then the Terminator bodyguard's mission will automatically change to slaughtering the entire bridge of the Supreme Bloodline and shutting down the void shields. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. And use this to attract Terminator squads from the Imperial Fists to engage in boarding actions, so that the Astartes from both sides can unite and completely eliminate the crew and guards loyal to the naval marshal inside the ship. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Moreover, according to Regent Gilliman's political maneuvering methods that leave no room for error. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. In the 6th month, with the fine acid rain falling once again from the dark sky. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. To a certain extent, this is one of the custodian tribune, Trajan Valorus's means of choosing a side. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Otherwise, the other party's head would definitely be successfully delivered to you by the Terminator bodyguards within a few hours. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. As for another Star Army Commander-in-Chief, Marshal Asarael, who also participated in the Six Lords Alliance. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. There will definitely be a Calidus assassin from the Inquisition beside Naval Marshal Perez as well. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. This unknown Primarch has only been here for a short time, but has successively killed 5 High Lords who incited rebellion and massacred hundreds of thousands of conservative officials, which is not something a Primarch who listens to others would do. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Therefore, you believe that unless this naval marshal chooses to turn to the Chaos Forces on the spot, and successfully ascends to demonhood, gaining immortality, it is possible to have a head-to-head, hard-fought duel with 2 Terminator squads. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. If it hadn't been for the fact that the Prime Minister of the Reformist faction and the legendary Master of the Scholastia Psychona personally came to your door for several talks in the following period, you would probably have continued to purge more personnel. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Hundreds of thousands of conservative officials were used by you as sacrifices to the Emperor, and the city of petitioners belonging to the Ministry of the Interior was even soaked in blood on the ground. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. In the 8th month, you successfully obtained the power to freely fill officials into the Ministry of Justice and the Ministry of the Interior, which had suffered the most severe personnel losses, through the newly reorganized reformist Terra High Council. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. A returning Primarch is enough to toss Holy Terra around, and that regent can also listen to other people's advice and suggestions, so that everyone can use political means. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Although the other party is full of doubts about your identity as a Primarch, They are unwilling to bear the burden of letting you personally go to the throne room to meet the Emperor in order to test your soul. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. In addition, there are also a million middle and low-level officials who are useless to the efficiency of the Empire's administrative departments who were dismissed on the spot and thrown into various hive cities to receive re-education in the lives of ordinary civilians. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Rather than saying that this is a compromise by the reformists to the Custodes, or the Imperial Fists and the Minotaurs chapter, it is better to say that it is simply to find you something to do, to prevent you from killing people out of boredom. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Because the rumor that Minotaur's chapter master Moloch is not the real person, but is possessed by the soul of an unknown Primarch, has almost spread throughout the noble class of Holy Terra, and the current ecclesiage's several visits to you. The smile on his face that has never disappeared, and the increasingly fanatical processions of loyal believers, have made everyone's careful thoughts even more cautious. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. However, even if all your plans fail, the Custodian Tribune can shirk responsibility to the Six Lords Alliance and explain that the death of the Army Marshal was just a reckless and out-of-control act by a Custodian captain, and the Six Lords Alliance cannot force the Custodes too hard. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. When this bloody storm lasted until the 7th day, close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. In the 7th month, the reason you announced the cessation of the purge was actually very simple, that is, the number of middle and low-level officials in the administrative department was indeed not enough. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. It is inevitable that there will be wrongful convictions, but such slight personnel losses are simply not worth mentioning compared to the chaos and disaster brought to Holy Terra by the Six Lords Alliance for power. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. The reason why the Terra High Council is unwilling to streamline the excess personnel is because the middle and low-level and even high-level officials of the Human Empire are completely just consumables, not simply negative assets. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. This High Lord was personally dismembered by Shield Captain Valerian of the Adeptus Custodes, along with his silent sisters, before the offensive operation at the Cathedral of the Ascension began, and successfully seized ground command of the Terra Star Army. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. In the end, faced with the constant influence of various realistic factors, after thinking twice, you had to stop this cleansing the Emperor's court operation that you had finally found a suitable excuse for. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Supervised by the Custodes and the Imperial Fists, with the Minotaur's chapter occasionally dispatching a few times to carry out assaults, the vast majority of the actions were a series of tasks carried out by your Hive World Star Army and some reorganized Terra Star Army, which achieved incredibly amazing progress. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Countless security fortresses belonging to the Department of Justice were successively breached by your Hive World Star Army. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Many captured middle and low-level officials of the Department of Justice will be identified according to the closeness of their relationship with the conservative faction, and then either executed on the spot or stripped of their positions. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. And you yourself seem to be completely unaware of these complex messages circulating among the nobles. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. The fierce battles above Holy Terra swept through like waves. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. But as one of the High Lords of the Council, the other party still allowed the Custodes to successfully join the correct side. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Only at this time did you vaguely understand. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Your mind is completely focused on how to rectify the bureaucratic system of Holy Terra and provide the necessary assistance to Guilliman's Indomitus crusade as much as possible. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Therefore, after you selected loyal elites from the major hive cities to fill the Ministry of the Interior and the Ministry of Justice, you submitted some proposals to the Terra High Council. Close black lens bracket. Thank you for your support. Happy New Year to everyone. Chapter 502. Minotaur on Holy Terra. Shadow of the Regent, 10. Open black lens bracket in the 9th month. A proposal you made gained the support of the High Lords of Terra. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. That was the temporary cancellation of the restrictions on the Adeptus Custodes, which had initially divided the High Lords, allowing the Custodes to conduct large-scale operations outside the Terran Palace. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Captain General of the Adeptus Custodes, Trajan Valores, also temporarily joined the 12-member High Lords Council, becoming the 13th High Lord in the true sense, rather than just holding an honorary title without power. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You originally wanted the Terran Council to permanently abolish this ancient regulation, allowing the Emperor's will to extend to more places. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. But you later realized that this was the limit of what the reformists could do. Unless you had the special ability to handle the entire administrative operation of the Empire overnight, you had to learn to compromise, otherwise the reformists would start to oppose you everywhere. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Sometimes, killing can solve problems, but it cannot solve all problems. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. In the end, in order to maintain the tacit understanding and balance between each other, you began to order the Minotaur's chapter to gradually withdraw from Holy Terra, leaving only a squad of Terminator bodyguards. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. At the same time, you also had some minor contact with the Adeptus Mechanicus. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. And this also involved the final fate of that conservative Forge Master. It is said that he was dismantled and dissolved into a huge metal body by another Magos who had a bad relationship with him, while praying. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. At this moment, Captain General Trajan Valores of the Adeptus Custodes nodded slightly to you, and then turned and walked outside. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You filled the entire Storm's Daughter with 2/3 of the valuable equipment from the Adeptus Mechanicus and countless munitions and supplies transferred from the Department of Internal Affairs once again. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Even though Chapter Master Pharaohs, through your reminder, tried to stay away from Huron Blackheart's solicitation and avoid contact with the Astral Claws chapter, due to various factors, on the way away from the Maelstrom, they were unreasonably attacked by the Minotaur's chapter, who regarded them as Astartes from a rebellious faction trying to escape. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You instantly understood that this was not the request of the Captain General of the Adeptus Custodes, but a vague decree issued by that person sitting on the golden throne. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. However, facing the hive world population of several hundred billion, even if you have the dual support of the Department of Justice and the Department of Internal Affairs, it is difficult to shake this terrifying situation. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. In the 12th month, you began to use your latent reputation and influence in the major hive cities to truly recruit hive world Astra Militarum regiments. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Captain General Trajan Valores visited again. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. At the same time, you also gave the current mortal captain of the Storm's Daughter a very secret mission. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. As for why you didn't return the Storm's Daughter to the Lamentor's chapter. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. According to your more in-depth analysis and investigation, Holy Terra is actually not suitable to become a hive world. Its own personnel load cannot bear so many hive world civilians, because there is no output here, only endless consumption. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You carefully recalled through Morlock's data stream, and then you subconsciously lamented that the Lamentor's chapter's luck was indeed somewhat unspeakable. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. In the 11th month, your mission focus shifted from the gradually returning to normal upper levels of Terra to the hive world civilians. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. First, you can't find their traces of traces at all, and second, you are worried that after you leave, Morlock will find that the battle barge has returned to the hands of the Lamentors, and a greater conflict will easily break out between the two sides. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. So, you want to try your best to change this situation. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket and you also accidentally discovered that the Minotaur's chapter's fleet still has the Storm's Daughter battle barge that was seized from the Lamentor's chapter during the Badab War. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Moreover, you have only heard of Carcharodons robbing others, and have never seen Carcharodons being robbed. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Fortunately, Chapter Master Pharaohs took precautions against this situation in advance. The Lamentor's Astartes did not suffer many casualties, but the Storm's Daughter battle barge was still lost. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. In the end, you had to make a very cruel and difficult decision. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. And these Hive World recruits, who have only undergone simple training, with the sole purpose of filling the lines on the battlefield, will form a special system on Holy Terra that everyone knows, that is, it can be used to consume the excessive population on Terra. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. However, your decision has successfully gained more support from the High Lords of Terra and the Department of the Army. In the Indomitus Crusade launched by Lord Regent Gilliman, every inch of land reclaimed and victory achieved will be filled with the flesh and blood and tears of countless Terran people. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You also don't want to wait until after you leave. The Hive cities that have been cleaned up with great difficulty will once again fall to the bottom of the pit of pity. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You originally wanted to refuse immediately while you were in a low mood, but you immediately saw Trajan's emotionless and scarred resolute face. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. To be honest, the combat strength of the Lamentors is in the middle reaches of the Astartes. Compared to the Carcharodons chapter, who roam the outer regions all year round, they are still a bit weaker. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. This time, he unhesitatingly extended a solemn invitation to you, hoping that you could follow him to the throne room to prove your noble status as a Primarch. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. This also leads to countless Terran people falling into starvation and being exploited by cultists or heretics once problems occur in the transportation routes from other star regions to Terra. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Since it is impossible to reduce expenditure, then find a way to increase income. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You took a deep breath and slowly drove the Terminator power armor to stand up. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. In the 13th month, just when you were bearing the torment of your conscience alone. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. In the 10th month, you did some more things. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Taking this opportunity, your Minotaur's chapter once again obtained many precious equipment replenishment opportunities from the Adeptus Mechanicus. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. That is to go to the Ghoul Stars as soon as possible, find a strange chapter called the Carcharodons, and personally deliver the entire battle barge and the munitions and supplies inside to this chapter. If the chapter master of the other side asks about the specific origin of these things, then the mortal captain will say a number 22 to gain the trust of the Carcharodons. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Even if the Terra Hive cities themselves are recruitment locations for various chapters and various troops, the carefully selected selection system does not play much of a role. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. And you also drove the Terminator power armor and followed. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You did not carry the black spear and the Minotaur shield with you, because you are about to meet the Lord of Mankind who has painstakingly maintained the Imperium of Man for 10,000 years. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. The Emperor. Close black lens bracket. Thank you all for your support. Chapter 503. Minotaur on Holy Terra. Shadow of the Regent. 11. Open black lens bracket. You drive your Terminator armor, following the Custodes Captain General Trajan Valores, leaving the Hive City garrison. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You leisurely enter secret passages known only to the Custodes through various means, Successfully entering the outer palace complex of the Terran Imperial Palace. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Just stepping out of the passage, you subconsciously raise your head and look around. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Using the night vision assist of your helmet's lenses, you see a large area of dilapidated palace buildings still bearing the traces of the old siege of Terra in the extremely dim night light. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Even the bolter shell craters on many walls and the melted holes left by high-powered laser weapons are still faintly visible. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Perhaps to commemorate the tragic battles of the past, or perhaps simply because the Custodes don't understand architectural theory. In any case, the palaces on the outskirts of the Imperial Palace have never been repaired. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. At this moment, the Custodes Captain General Trajan Valoris, who is pointing the way, does not explain too much. He just silently glances at you, then quickly turns around and strides forward. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Soon after, under his guidance, you pass by an important relic left in the Terran Imperial Palace by the Imperial Fists chapter. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. It is a huge bone pillar inlaid with the handbones of Astartes of the Imperial Fists chapter who sacrificed themselves during the siege of Terra. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. However, the trepidation and anticipation of meeting the Emperor quickly suppress the unpleasant experiences between the two of you. Close black lens bracket. Thank you all for your support. Open black lens bracket. In fact, even if a true Primarch were standing here now, their vast size, far exceeding that of an Astartes, would be dwarfed by the surrounding buildings. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Roar. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Although you don't know how the idea of saving time could desecrate the Emperor. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. At this moment, your vision, through the helmet's lenses, keenly notices the other 11 incomplete stone platforms between the Primarch statues, with only the bases remaining. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Immediately afterward, something even more unsettling quickly occurs. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You inadvertently see that at the end of those pale hand bones are hung strips of pure seals or weather-beaten prayer scriptures fluttering in the wind. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Many times, you have to rely on some hidden passages to shorten the time spent on the road. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. These traitor Primarchs who lost their statues have either been dead for 10,000 years, or are hiding in the warp, occasionally coming out to stir up trouble. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. He quickly sorted out his mood, and the temperament he revealed changed a lot, like a power sword that had just been unsheathed. Close black lens bracket. In the middle of the night, I couldn't resist the temptation. Braving the biting cold wind, I rode my little electric scooter to the cinema and watched The Wandering Earth 2 at the last midnight show. To this, I can only say awesome. This is the most awesome science fiction movie in China and even the world today. Open black lens bracket. You, in a daze, relying on the last trace of conscious awareness, suddenly let out a deafening roar from your mouth. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. The next moment, the Custodes Captain General Trajan Valoris, who entered the Emperor's sanctuary, paused slightly. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You and the Custodes Captain General Trajan Valoris continue to move forward, passing by ancient buildings one after another. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket until you finally arrive in front of the ancient doors of the throne room, which are still tightly closed. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. However, your suggestions were all rejected by him in a cold tone. Trajan's reason was that all disrespect to the Emperor was forbidden in the Terran Imperial Palace. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Demon. Spawn. Tool. Currency. Hope. 22. Gene Sire. Horus. 13. Terra. 11. Disappointment. War. Future. Chaos. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You only know that the sun has risen and set twice, and the two of you have been walking towards the depths of the imperial palace, passing by ancient palaces of unknown purpose one after another. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You shook your metal helmet at him, and then, you slowly drove the Terminator armor to the bottom of the huge steps, and began to climb up to the throne room step by step. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You subconsciously turned your gaze. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. The Custodes Captain General Trajan Valoris standing aside didn't say a word. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. At this moment, you slightly raise your metal helmet, and your gaze, through the lenses, stares at the magnificent palace in front of you, which is incredibly vast and comparable to the masterpiece of giants. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. And this terrifying psychic wave, like a psychic tsunami, also seems to contain the overlapping voices of countless humans mixed together. It's as if countless people are speaking to you at the same time. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. At this moment, the data streams slowly turning in your mind make you involuntarily think of some familiar people and things. And a faint sigh escapes from your mouth. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. At this moment, a psychic wave, like the friction of glass and metal, unbearable, immediately echoes in your ears. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You forcefully drive the Terminator armor and push open the ancient and heavy metal door of the throne room. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Those ancient imperial languages, with extremely chaotic and even incoherent syntax, gradually occupy your entire mind, leaving you no time or opportunity to think. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Immediately afterward, what first comes into the range of your lenses is a huge staircase of extremely spectacular scale, and the countless steps seem to gradually piece together a very impressive double-headed eagle pattern relying on the patterns of the steps themselves. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You shook your metal helmet slightly, completely abandoning those sentimental and inexplicable emotions. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. After a long journey of 3 days, the two of you finally arrived at the heart of Holy Terra, the center of the human empire, the Emperor's sanctuary. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. As time goes by, you can no longer know exactly how long has passed. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. When you come out of the passage again, you find that you are near a circular theater with a very large building scale. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. He just raised his hand and pointed to the throne room above the huge steps. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You choose to continue walking towards the depths of the imperial palace with the Custodes Captain General Trajan Valoris, who is silently waiting for you. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. And the soul consciousness that has been hidden in this strong body seems to clearly feel that the divine power that cannot be described in words has shifted its focus and slowly stared at you. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. However, you clearly know that if you do anything that would defile the Emperor's sanctuary or threaten the throne room, they will show you their hidden terrifying fangs at the first time. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. You took a deep breath and slowly drove the Terminator armor into it. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Subsequently, under the dimly lit huge steps, 300 fully armed Custodes guards, holding inferno spears and buckler shields, and wearing golden artifice power armor, stood firmly under flagpoles bearing eagles. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. During this period, you once suggested to the Custodes Captain General Trajan Valoris to call for a vehicle, or simply let go and run and charge. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. And on the outermost periphery of this ancient building, 10 huge statues belonging to the loyalist Gene sires stand looming in the thin gray-white mist. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. He seems to have once again become the head of the Custodes from a mere guide. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. The human empire should have, under the leadership of the Emperor, had a brighter and more prosperous golden future. Close black lens bracket. The reason for being so excited is naturally that there is also an underwater plot in the subsequent plot of this book, so there is some resonance. But in any case, the Chinese values shown in this film are worthy of in-depth discussion by everyone, and are far more worthy of repeated chewing than American science fiction of individual heroism. For example, the United Nations slogan for mankind. For example, in the last plot, the heavy diving suit used by one of the protagonists for diving actually vaguely has a sense of power armor, haha. And some of the plot props and ideas in it also gave me the illusion that I was writing a Warhammer novel. Open black lens bracket. Your brows seem to be enduring an extremely huge oppressive force, causing you to frown involuntarily, and a ceramite palm subconsciously rests on the cold metal door. Close black lens bracket. Open black lens bracket. Unfortunately. Close black lens bracket. The eyes of the body you inhabit, along with the soul within, seem to gaze directly at a frigid sun, residing within an ancient mechanical device, the Golden Throne. Your entire being uncontrollably knelt on one knee, and you removed the metal helmet from your head. Your expression, at times twisted, at times indifferent, slowly lowered your head towards this great and tragic human god emperor, still living in the world. Just then, in a daze, you seemed to vaguely see a slender and dark, tall figure standing below the Golden Throne. Data corruption in progress. Your consciousness gradually dissipated. You died. Simulation ended, lasting 1 year and 1 month. The following options can be retained from this simulation. 1. The ancient black spear, Master. Note. This is the exclusive weapon of Astarian Moloch, chapter master of the Minotaur's chapter. Note. Legend has it that this is a master-crafted power weapon modified from a variant spear called a relic spear from the armory of the Adeptus Custodes. Note. It can directionally emit a disintegration ray from the dark age of technology, with terrifying power. Unfortunately, Chapter Master Moloch is obsessed with close combat and rarely uses this method to fight enemies. Note. My eyes, Moloch, who inadvertently stared directly at the Emperor himself through your body, couldn't help but let out a painful roar. He did not die, but will suffer a period of blindness. Note. Your reputation with Chapter Master Moloch himself, and the Minotaur's chapter, has increased to revered, temporary. Please check the simulator's diplomacy page for details. 2. Brand new Cobra-class destroyer, common. Note. This is a Cobra-class destroyer that has just completed its consecration on the Forge world of Steel Ball. Note. It is the most commonly used torpedo attack vessel in the Imperial Navy, and its high speed and maneuverability allow the Cobra-class destroyer to quickly seize advantageous positions for launching torpedoes on the cosmic battlefield. Note. Corresponding to the high-speed maneuverability of the Cobra-class destroyer is the fact that a large warp engine is crammed into a smaller hull structure, along with very weak armor protection, which will make the destroyer, whose void shields temporarily fail, a sufficiently excellent moving target. Note. The Imperial Navy reminds you. There are 10,000 warp routes, Geller fields are number 1. If the navigator doesn't guide you properly, the Golden Throne will shed tears. 3. A chance to obtain an Emperor-class battleship, unique, choose carefully. Note. You will gain the authority to travel to a random location on a human Imperial space battlefield or any Forge world. Note. You can use your Primarch status to threaten, exchange resources, or use force to seize or steal an Emperor-class battleship belonging to the human Imperium. Note. The Emperor-class battleship is one of the main capital ships of the Imperial Navy and the Adeptus Mechanicus. It also serves as both an aircraft carrier and a command flagship. The Imperium has now lost the technology and ability to build them from scratch, so every Emperor-class battleship that has not yet sunk is an important protector of the Imperial territory. Note. Regardless of whether you successfully acquire ownership of the Emperor-class battleship, you will be teleported back after a certain period. Please carefully consider all actions you take to acquire the ship. Note. This might be a blessing and gift from the Emperor for your meritorious service in rectifying Holy Terra and your first meeting with him, or perhaps just compensation to make up for erasing part of your memory. Hee hee. A blue-bird man with wings on his back muttered to himself in the chaotic and treacherous warp. The next second, an extremely terrifying psychic power swept in from the depths of the warp, completely obliterating the giggling figure. Comedy, don't provoke the God Emperor in the warp. Performer, greater demon of Tzeentch, Tzeentch. This simulation has ended, consuming 1 throne token. Current throne tokens, 2. After the simulation completely ended, the first thing Luo Sha did when he opened his tightly closed eyes was to cover his short, graying head with a giant hand covered in a vibranium shell. At this moment, he felt as if his entire head had just been thrown into a washing machine and spun around for an extremely long time. This unbearable feeling of dizziness mixed with stinging pain made him subconsciously let out a low groan. Such a strange taste was the first time Luo Sha had experienced it after the simulation ended. "My lord, did you feel unwell just now? Do you need me to provide you with panacea?" Just then, the Iron Man David in the Thunderhawk cockpit shook his metal head slightly. Its eye sockets flickering with blue light, it thoughtfully asked Luo Sha in the cabin. Luo Sha didn't reply immediately. He waited until the feeling of dizziness gradually disappeared, and the stinging pain also nearly dissipated, before turning his head towards the cockpit and said in a deep voice, "No need, David, just fly the plane properly." Then, Luo Sha, with his brows slightly furrowed, quickly focused his attention on the simulator. He quickly read through the simulation content, and then let out a long breath. "After I pushed open the door of the throne room using Moloch's body, something must have happened. But why doesn't the Emperor want me to know, and insists on erasing that memory? A truth that I can't know now? Or a person I can't see?" Luo Sha's thoughts raced as his expression gradually returned to indifference. But he had no impression of that memory, so he couldn't guess the truth no matter what. The next second, his gaze fell on the text note in the third reward. "The Blue Bird Man must be a greater demon of Tzeentch, and a greater demon can be said to be an incarnation of Tzeentch himself. The reason why it said those words is probably to arouse suspicion in my heart. After all, the Emperor has just purged a part of my memory. If Tzeentch thinks that he can shake my tenacious will at will, then he really underestimates me. The Emperor may not be a good person, but the Chaos Gods are a pile of dung." At this moment, Luo Sha, whose thoughts were racing in his mind, sneered slightly. He closed his eyes again. At this moment, Luo Sha did not immediately choose the simulation reward, but directly closed the simulator. He needed to think about how to make a choice. The most valuable is naturally the chance to obtain an Emperor-class battleship. That's an Emperor-class battleship. For Luo Sha, who currently doesn't even have a single cosmic-class ship, it's no different from going directly from steamed buns and pickles to a Manchu Han imperial feast. But the corresponding problem also appeared. This is just a chance like a lottery draw, and you need to go there in person. And the Emperor must have his considerations for not directly sending an Emperor-class battleship. At the same time, Luo Sha's biggest concern is, all the ships of the human empire use warp engines. Although the native world also has special spaces with similar attributes. But whether the warp engine from the Warhammer universe can be used in the native world is still unknown. If the warp engine fails, then the Emperor-class battleship can only temporarily become a metal fortress that cannot leave the ground, and cannot exert its due strength at all. The Twin Islands base was covered in ice and snow. Having just returned to the base's main hall, Luo Sha eagerly convened a temporary roundtable meeting. Besides Iron Man David and the shipborne AI Cortana, even the Servo Skull, who was diligently dismantling a Tau Empire battlesuit to absorb technological experience for the Micro Knight and Sage titles, was summoned. Luo Sha's purpose in gathering them was to discuss how he should choose his simulation reward. At this moment, Luo Sha, raising a vibranium hand and stroking his chin, scanned the people before him. He took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, "We now have a situation where we can immediately obtain a brand new Cobra-class destroyer, or have the opportunity to obtain an Emperor-class battleship through various means. Everyone, please note that it is an opportunity to obtain, which means there is a possibility of failure, and it is not like the Cobra-class destroyer, which can be secured. So, if anyone has any thoughts, please share them." After hearing Luo Sha's question, Iron Man David, his eye sockets flashing blue, slightly shook his metal head. However, He didn't say much, but turned to look at Reditus, who was floating above the metal round table. First of all, we must congratulate Primarch for once again gaining the favor of the great Emperor. This is a precious honor worthy of being remembered by all of us. Although according to the ideas and concepts of our Adeptus Mechanicus, big is good, big is wonderful, and the value of an Emperor-class battleship and a Cobra-class destroyer are not comparable at all, we still need to consider the influence of realistic factors. Currently, the total number of automatic servo robots in all our sub-bases, plus those in Latveria, is about 70 to 80,000. Including the reserves of the sub-island foundry, let's calculate it as 100,000. If Primarch chooses the Emperor-class battleship, what we need first is a near-Earth orbital spaceport that can be used for daily berthing and maintenance. Then, all the production lines of the foundry will need to be temporarily suspended. After all, just dealing with the metal materials for building the spaceport is a very troublesome matter. Since Primarch will not conscript a large number of human servants to participate in the construction task, the number of automatic servo robots needs to be expanded several times to carry out basic work. In fact, even if we want to conscript human servants, the number of people we currently control is not enough. Don't look at me with strange eyes, this is not over yet. If everything goes smoothly and the spaceport is also completed, I remember that an Emperor-class battleship requires at least 25,000 skilled crew members to barely start. Please note that starting here refers to starting the warp drive. If you want to deploy void shields and control weapon arrays, I think 1 million is a relatively ideal number. At this moment, Reditus, his short mechanical arms waving back and forth, leaned on the metal round table. He talked eloquently to the people around him. And every time he finished a sentence, Luo Shah's brow furrowed, and his face gradually changed. Honorable Primarch, I can prove that what your tech priest said is basically correct. Back then, the Stormbird battle barge had more than 2 million human servants stationed in my hull year-round, and the number of servants needed for daily maintenance was only more, not less. At this moment, Cortana, the ship-borne AI, who looked like a giant metal caterpillar, said to Luo Shah in a mechanical tone. After hearing the other party's words, Luo Shah, squinting his eyes, took a deep breath, and he once again asked in a deep voice. Then, if we are more realistic and only choose the Cobra-class destroyer. Primarch, according to the ship data I know, the Cobra-class destroyer is only 1.5 kilometers long, 0.3 kilometers wide, and weighs about 5.7 million tons. There is no need to build a near-Earth spaceport. Any sub-base can be converted into a dock. Moreover, since the ship's volume is relatively small, many internal facilities can be extensively modified. Some equipment positions that originally required manpower to control can be turned into fully automatic facilities. In this way, the crew size of 15,000 people can be reduced to 5,000 to 3,000 people, which can reduce the burden on our team too much. At this moment, the red light in Reditus's eye sockets flickered. He seemed to have calculated all the data, and then began to report to Luo Shah. Luo Shah did not continue to speak, he waved his hand to everyone, which was regarded as dismissing the temporary roundtable meeting. The next moment, Reditus, driving the anti-gravity engine, slowly rose into the air. He circled back and forth around the ship-borne AI, who was slowly moving its metal limbs, and then flew straight into the base channel. After the huge ship-borne AI, Cortana also left the base hall. Iron Man David, who had been silent all the time, slightly bowed and said to Luo Shah. My lord, if you really find it difficult to give up the Emperor-class battleship, you can completely get it first. Although Reditus's words are true, our power is not immutable. As time goes by, we can completely conquer more places and acquire more people, so that the Emperor-class battleship can become one of your mounts. No need to persuade me, David. As a Primarch, my goal should be a Gloriana-class battleship, not hesitating for the sake of a mere Emperor-class battleship. At this moment, Luo Shah, whose brows gradually relaxed, seemed to have made up his mind. He suddenly smiled at Iron Man David and said softly, there are no enemies in the home world that require an Emperor-class battleship to deal with, and it is not worth wasting a lot of productivity and manpower for an Emperor-class battleship. Moreover, whether the warp drive can be used in the home world also needs to be verified by ourselves. Therefore, a Cobra-class destroyer that can be obtained immediately is actually our best choice. David, I remember that the Antarctic base has always been vacant, right? How is the construction situation there? After hearing Luo Sha's question, the blue light in Iron Man David's eye sockets flickered. He unhurriedly said, "My lord, do you want to set up the Antarctic base as our dock? That is indeed a suitable place. The automatic servo robots and some mechanical creations that were left there before, because there were no important tasks, so I could only set them to the basic goal of expanding and maintaining the base. Now, if the land in Antarctica is indeed suitable, it is also worth looking forward to building an air harbor in the Antarctic location in the future to enter and exit Terra. Thank you all for your support. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Ultimately, the pragmatic Rorschach compromised with many realistic factors. In the current stage, an Emperor-class battleship for the entire team. Not only would it not become an important fighting force, but it would also become a huge burden that would lower productivity. Therefore, he planned to choose the Cobra-class destroyer from the rewards. In this way, not only can the effectiveness of the warp drive in the native world be gradually verified, it can also train his crew through the real internal space of the ship. Soon after, Rorschach, wearing vibranium-powered armor, and Iron Man David arrived at the Antarctic base again. At this moment, all the automatic servo robots and mechanical creations originally belonging to Hydra began to prepare for the arrival of the Cobra-class destroyer under the control of Iron Man David. Buzz buzz buzz, accompanied by the buzzing sound from the air. Rorschach, who reopened the simulator page, chose the second simulation reward without hesitation. The next second, a metal ship 1.5 kilometers long and 0.3 kilometers wide gradually revealed its magnificent and huge figure in the brightly lit Antarctic base. Boom! The metal hull weighing 5.7 million tons landed heavily, and the thick chassis was deeply embedded under the metal floor, and it also made a deafening vibration sound. Just as Iron Man David hurriedly directed a large number of automatic servo robots to check the specific condition of the destroyer. Rorschach, who had not closed the simulator page, frowned slightly. At this moment, the third reward, which should have disappeared with the completion of the selection, still existed. And gradually moved to the prayer support page of the Golden Throne. Rorschach squinted his eyes and carefully checked it. But found that the third reward that had successfully become a prayer support clearly showed the time limit and the Chaos logo belonging to the Slaaneshi demon. What does this mean? Isn't this the reward given to me by the Emperor? Or is this actually a trap set by Slaanesh through some secret means? Rorschach took a deep breath and muttered to himself. But then, he shook his head slightly again. According to the Emperor's style, he will definitely not let Slaanesh succeed easily, so it is the originally peaceful Imperial planet that has undergone some changes due to Slaanesh's evil taste, so my support is needed. Rorschach, whose expression gradually became serious, slowly closed the simulator page. He pondered for a while, and decided not to worry about this matter for the time being. As the first Chaos blessing approached, Rorschach did not intend to disperse the only combat power in his hands. After all, for any of Slaanesh's schemes, if he doesn't even intend to enter the game, the other party has no way to deal with it. Slaanesh, if you have the ability, come to my native land to find trouble. If you don't have the ability, then hold back first. Rorschach, with a blank expression, couldn't help but sneer. He turned his gaze, focusing on the Cobra-class destroyer in front of him. A few days later, Rorschach successfully settled the Cobra-class destroyer in the Antarctic base. However, due to the insufficient number of tech priests researchers in the base, only the automatic servo robot team can be allowed to carry out the task of building the dock. As for the internal transformation plan of the ship and the experimental plan of the warp drive, it will take some time to wait. After returning to Gemini Island base, as soon as Rorschach stepped out of the cabin, he immediately ordered Iron Man David to notify Latveria. Let Prime Minister Zola prepare to establish a naval academy. Start recruiting ages throughout Europe. and physically fit basic trainees, preparing in advance for real space crew members. Afterwards, Rorschach also began to sort out the complete list of combat personnel and weapons and equipment currently under his command with the help of Iron Man David. Now, in addition to the 3 stormtrooper companies that are still in the running in stage, and the 2 Lamenters companies, the Latvian National Defense Force can mobilize about 10,000 to 20,000 mortal soldiers. The Tokyo base can also mobilize about 1,000 ninja troops, as well as the super-powered commando team formed by Bucky and others. At the same time, if Rorschach is willing to spend a lot of resources and reputation, he can also summon a company of Astartes from the Carcharodon's chapter. At this moment, Rorschach, who vaguely remembered something, opened the simulator again. He carefully checked the diplomacy page with the Minotaur's chapter. According to the explanation marked, because the reputation of worship is temporary, so Rorschach can only perform 1 summon. He can choose chapter master Moloch himself, or a Terminator squad to come to support for 13 days. However, after the summons, all the temporary reputation of the Minotaur's chapter will be reset to 0. Rorschach must re-establish basic contact and friendly communication with the Minotaurs before he can continue to increase his reputation. The above are all combat forces that are completely loyal to Rorschach. As for the help of Thor and Tony, who also belong to the Inquisition in the native world, Rorschach was not included in the calculation. The army of thousands of mind-controlled troops was classified as weapons and equipment by Iron Man David. Finally, there is no need to count the individual weapons in the base. After all, even the stormtroopers are using auxiliary power armor and bolters, and the mortal National Defense Forces are also using laser weapons and carapace armor. Rorschach can say very confidently, his treatment of his subordinates stands at the position of major forces all over the world. According to the data coordinated by Iron Man David, who temporarily took over the small and large affairs of the Foundry, the number of Thunderhawk gunships in the Gemini Island base has reached 50. And with the continuous casting of the Foundry production line, this number will continue to rise. It's a pity that there is only 1 Land Raider Crusader, a heavy ground vehicle. Because Redditus has always been unable to solve the engine manufacturing problem of the Land Raider. Even building a production line is just to manufacture metal shells without power, which is purely a waste of more resources and productivity. However, Rorschach can consume reputation and resources. Directly transferring a batch of Lehman Russ tanks from the Tetham Industrial Hive also makes up for the regret and defect of not having heavy vehicles. Moreover, the super production of Taurus fast assault vehicles and other light vehicles. It is also enough to meet the requirements of the Astartes for short and medium distance movement and raids. As for the Sky Carrier far away on Hydra Island, and the Cobra-class destroyer at the Antarctic base, it will be difficult to join the ranks in the short term, so it is not included in the calculation data. In fact, all the strength Rorschach possesses now, it is already equivalent to a small Astartes chapter that is unknown in the human empire. And for ordinary Astartes chapters, some resources are far less extravagant than Rorschach uses. Soon after, Rorschach and Iron Man David came to several conclusions through a lot of data. That is in the native world. The existence of these combat forces allows Rorschach to walk sideways completely, without fear of offending any official forces. Of course, the premise of all this is not to provoke old guys like Ji and Odin God King who are far beyond common sense. But if Rock's combat power is put into a relatively fierce battlefield in the human empire, perhaps it can play the role of a surprise attack and boost morale. If you grit your teeth and work hard, with the cooperation of the Astra Militarum or the local defense forces, a planet-scale war is not impossible to deal with. However, this requires Rock's side to pay an extremely heavy price in casualties. At this moment, Rorschach, who took a deep breath, turned his head to look at Iron Man David beside him. He sighed with a somewhat helpless expression. The revolution has not yet succeeded, comrades still need to work hard. My lord, I think the next stage of our major goal should be to conquer the entire native world. After all, population and resources are always welcome. Even after unification, we can immediately launch a planet colonization plan. With only hundreds of years of continuous development, it is not impossible to successfully launch a great crusade belonging to you. Of course, when we step onto the Earth stage, we also need a suitable time point or important event to intervene, otherwise the human world, which will gradually unite because of our attack, will bring us greater resistance and trouble, and perhaps some of your friends and friendly forces will turn around and fight us. As soon as Iron Man David finished speaking, Rorschach, who was squinting his eyes, fell into a state of contemplation. After a long silence, he suddenly instructed Iron Man David with a solemn expression. "David, please set up a memo for me temporarily without a time limit. As for the name, let's call it Earth Unification War. Nurgle, the Benevolent Father." On the training grounds of the Gemini Island base, accompanied by intense sounds of metal clashing and sparks flying, a large group of stormtroopers with prominent yellow markings painted on their left shoulders, ceramite pauldrons, were desperately besieging a standard assault squad composed of 5 Lamenters Astartes. They were completely barehanded, without using any weapons. However, the Astartes, directly controlling their power armor with neural interfaces, swung their heavy fists and feet with reaction speeds far exceeding the stormtroopers. Almost every attack resulted in a stormtrooper wearing assisted power armor crashing heavily to the ground. As the stormtroopers' metal helmets shattered, they also spat out a large amount of blood, and were basically dizzy and collapsed on the ground, unable to rise again. At this moment, Rorschach, having removed his vibranium power armor, stood with his arms crossed. He stood at the edge of the training ground, carefully watching the daily training between the Lamenters and the stormtroopers. Formation. Formation. Pay attention to the formation between the Astartes. Didn't you see that even when they launch an attack, they subconsciously maintain the distance between each other? On the chaotic battlefield, the only thing you can trust is your teammate beside you. Only they can withstand the ubiquitous deadly attacks for you. Even though this was just a daily training session, and the two sides differed by not only 19 flesh enhancement surgeries, but also at least decades of combat experience. Rorschach, who had been squinting for a while, couldn't help but shout loudly at the stormtroopers. Although the Lamenters were his Astartes descendants inherited from Sanguinius, the stormtroopers were, after all, elite mortal warriors personally trained and selected by Rorschach. Sure enough, with Rorschach's reminder, many stormtroopers who had regained their strength still chose to spit out a few mouthfuls of blood, then gritted their teeth and climbed up from the ground, continuing to charge towards the Astartes squad. In the end, an Astartes who was specifically targeted by all the stormtroopers was heavily besieged and fell to the ground, completing the goal of daily training. To some extent, exchanging dozens of elite mortals for one Astartes is not a losing deal, but if it were a real battlefield, you would be completely torn to pieces by these battle brothers the moment you met. Rorschach, taking a deep breath, slowly stepped forward. At this moment, all the Lamenters Astartes present, whether standing on the sidelines watching the show or standing in the center of the field, saluted Rorschach with an Aquila salute. And all the stormtroopers struck their chests heavily with a clenched right fist, performing the prescribed military salute from the stormtrooper training manual. In fact, according to the many requirements of the Imperium of Man. As a Primarch, and also shouldering the responsibilities of a chapter master, Rorschach was supposed to be kneeled to by everyone, especially the Lamenters. Unfortunately, Rorschach disliked others kneeling to him from the bottom of his heart. Recently, my body may have started growing and developing again, and my power armor is actually a little ill-fitting. I just handed it over to the tech priest for modification. But after watching you for a while, I want to personally go on the field and have some fun. Which battle brothers want to practice with me? Rorschach, with a slight smile on his lips, glanced around at the surrounding Lamenters. He said to everyone in a gentle tone. Perhaps these words seemed like some kind of pre-battle provocation. But Rorschach was actually telling the truth. His height was indeed gradually increasing. It wasn't very obvious before, but after the vibranium power armor felt a little tight and uncomfortable. Rorschach belatedly realized this. Now, Rorschach's overall height was steadily moving towards 2 meters and 30 centimeters. Perhaps with the completion of more enhancement surgeries and normal development, he could indeed reach the minimum limit of a Primarch. At the very least, he couldn't be shorter than the Alfarius brothers, right? Otherwise, what would he do if he met Omegan again in the future and was laughed at for his height? Ah, Primarch, how about I come instead? At this moment, the first company captain of the Lamenters shook his bald head with a very helpless expression. He stared at Rorschach not far away and said in a deep voice. As for the other battle brothers, not to mention actually fighting a Primarch, just overcoming the awe and love from their bloodline was already an extremely difficult task. Moreover, only he, a veteran of 100 years, could fully control his own power with ease. After all, if they accidentally injured the Primarch, even if the Primarch wouldn't blame them, they themselves wouldn't be able to forgive themselves. Okay. Rorschach, whose expression gradually returned to indifference, did not refuse. He simply moved his hands and feet, not wearing any power armor. Then, he suddenly raised a palm and stretched it towards the air. Buzz buzz buzz. In the next second, a series of metal rings exuding purple energy on the outside suddenly streaked across the air like agile flying birds, quickly and accurately encircling Rorschach's thick arms. First company captain, this doesn't count as cheating, does it? Rorschach, squinting his eyes, asked the Lamenter's first company captain who was slowly stepping forward. Primarch, even if you just casually picked up a chainsword, I wouldn't say anything more. The first company captain, instinctively squeezing a stiff smile from the corner of his mouth, quickly nodded and said. However, just as the surrounding onlookers were somewhat surprised by the first company captain's behavior. Boom boom boom, accompanied by the roar of magnetic boots heavily stomping on the metal floor. The first company captain, wearing speed-type power armor, unexpectedly launched the jet device located behind the power pack without hesitation. In an instant, his tall metal body was like a steel behemoth, quickly launching a charge towards Rorschach's direction, the whole person speeding away. At the same time, two thick arms, like huge iron pincers, swept forcefully towards Rorschach's tall body. I've been guarding against you. In a flash of lightning, Rorschach, slightly twitching his eyebrows, shifted his footsteps. His whole person instantly turned into a dark phantom, quickly and silently falling to the side of the Lamenter's first company captain. Although the first company captain could not easily capture any traces of Rorschach's use of shadow step with his vision, he immediately relied on his 100 years of combat experience and incomparably keen combat intuition. A metal arm that was still in the process of sweeping suddenly retracted forcefully, continuing to sweep heavily towards the air on the side. Rumble. However, at this time, Rorschach, whose feet had successfully landed, had completely approached the other side of the opponent. Immediately afterwards, his two palms pushed forward suddenly. One by one, the metal 10 rings bound between the thick arms immediately sprayed out like a surging wave. Wrapped in the buzzing of air, heavily hitting the ceramite abdominal armor side of the first company captain's power armor. Squeak! And accompanied by the harsh sound of magnetic boots forcibly detaching from the metal floor. And the slight tremor of the entire tall body crashing to the ground. The not yet truly mature Primarch Rorschach used only one move. To completely blast away the Astartes, who was the first company captain of the Lamenters. Thank you for your support. Soon after, several more eager Carcharodons were defeated by Rogol in one move. While the surrounding people looked at each other, they also subconsciously lamented the gap between themselves and the Primarch. Although Rogol also used the metal rings of power. However, he did not actually unleash the true power of the 10 rings. He completely relied on his strong physical fitness and the special abilities he controlled to deal with everything. Moreover, this was still a friendly sparring match without power armor augmentation or the use of various weapons and equipment. If it were on a chaotic battlefield, with just one encounter, the Carcharodons would suffer a great number of casualties. And this is the real difference between a Primarch and an Astartes. To some extent, they are more like two completely different creatures. After all, mass-produced Astartes and carefully crafted Primarchs cannot be compared in terms of materials alone. In the end, Rogol left the training ground contentedly. And the stormtroopers, led by the Astartes, were learning how to more accurately control the firing of bolters, as well as memorizing basic information about various common aliens in the Imperium of Man. In fact, even if the stormtroopers could not become true Astartes in the short term, Rogol would only be more strict with them, not more lax. After all, the stormtroopers in his ideal should be like the solar auxilia of the past. Fully armed, they could achieve a kill ratio of 5 to 1, or even 3 to 1, against Astartes. Of course, this is also a stormtrooper's lifelong goal. Inside the brightly lit base hall, a huge metal round table was fitted with projection devices and a detailed and complete world map. At this moment, Rogel and the Iron Man David, sitting at either end of the metal round table, were playing a world-class game through the projection device. Rogel, with one hand slightly clenched into a fist and his chin resting on the back of his hand, raised his hand and pointed. A group of projections representing the Carcharodon's company landed on the map of Europe. The next second, these lifelike miniature projections launched a swift offensive. Finally, a small Astartes raised a broken head in his palm and began to howl to the sky. Astartes squads carry out decapitation tactics separately, attacking dozens of small European countries within 12 hours. Due to David's network shielding interference, no news can be successfully sent out. I'm sorry, my lord, not all small European countries lack special forces. One of my black magician units foresaw your arrival in advance. Mobilized all heavy vehicles to besiege the Astartes squads. Before Rogel could finish speaking, the Iron Man David, with blue light flashing in his eye sockets, shook his head slightly. He raised a metal finger and pointed casually. A large group of robe-wearing magicians made of projections rushed towards the Astartes squads, and behind them, a tank formation projection slowly surrounded them. Tisk. Then I'll mobilize the psychic troops and leave through the teleportation gate first, right? Rogel raised his eyes and stared at the Iron Man David. He subconsciously clicked his tongue and continued to say with a calm expression. My lord, your offensive intentions have been exposed. You are immediately completely packaged as a terrifying enemy by the whole world under the propaganda of countless public opinions. The Iron Man David, with blue light flashing in his eye sockets, reminded him. It doesn't matter, do you expect me to persuade the enemy without bolters and chainswords? Rogel narrowed his eyes and shook his head slightly. He said with a cold expression, since you have determined that the decapitation tactic has failed, then I will use the old method, using a large number of troops to push through one country after another. David, isn't this a bit unfair? Why does your human coalition have titans? Do you think the current native world can create this kind of thing that completely exceeds the scale? The next second, Rogel couldn't help but widen his eyes as he watched a Warhound Titan slowly move out of the projection in front of the Iron Man David. He asked the other party very suspiciously, my lord, this is just a metaphor, and have you forgotten that you have become the public enemy of the whole world before? Your friend Tony chose to fight for humanity. I think Mr. Tony could also build a Warhound Titan if he became a tech priest or a sage, right? The Iron Man David raised his hand and scratched his smooth and bright metal head. He said calmly, that's not impossible, but since you're doing this, then I might as well come with an Imperial Navy fleet, wouldn't it be better to just bombard from orbit? Rogel, who couldn't help but sneer, slowly leaned back on the metal chair. He looked at the Iron Man David expressionlessly and said, my lord, this is just a possibility of military chess deduction, and we are just playing casually. After all, we don't have more intelligence information, and we haven't set any parameters. Of course, if you really want to start a war of unification from Europe, I can be sure that black magicians and magical creatures like werewolves really exist. As for whether they help the human side, that's another matter. The Iron Man David, with blue light flashing in his eye sockets, slowly crossed his two metal fingers, and his elbows rested on the metal round table. He continued to say to Rogel, there are traces of aliens again. Rogel frowned slightly when he heard the Iron Man David's words, and grinned. No, my lord, werewolves are more like an ancient curse or an infectious disease, and it has existed since ancient times. It is estimated that the harm is not great, and the local humans can handle it themselves. We can help deal with it later when we have time. Forget it, David, I'm not playing anymore. You continue to supervise the matters of the Second Sun Island Foundry and the Hydra Island Foundry. By the way, remember to help me see how the size of the power armor, the Reditus modification, is going. Rogel, who shook his head slightly, stood up from the metal round table. He swayed his tall body and walked towards the private space without looking back. And the Iron Man David, who also got up, waved his hand casually. All the projections on the metal table disappeared, leaving only the complete world map shining brightly under the light. In fact, Rogel and the Iron Man David were indeed just playing a military chess game. However, if the opportunity is right, this kind of military chess game will completely become a way for Rogel to command various warbands and countless mortal troops to attack every location. Of course, being a commander mascot is not Rogel's style. He prefers to charge into traps on the battlefield. If everything goes as planned, the best candidate to be responsible for the mobilization of any war affairs in the next few years is still the Iron Man David himself. Buzz buzz buzz, accompanied by the bursts of low hum emitted when the servo devices and electronic muscle bundles are activated. Piece by piece, the modified vibranium power armor was recovered on Luo Sha's tall body. After everything was completed, he stepped down from the dressing platform surrounded by a large number of automatic servo robots. Luo Sha slightly turned his gaze. His emotionless eyes looked towards Iron Man David standing beside him. Iron Man David, with blue light flickering in his eye sockets, did not utter any words. Instead, he walked forward holding a low-temperature box specially used to store frozen grenades. At this moment, 2 companies of Lamenter's Astartes and 3 companies of stormtroopers had completely assembled. They were wearing speed-type power armor and auxiliary power armor respectively. Fully armed, they stood in place, waiting for the review from the Primarch. Kai. As the low-temperature box slowly opened in Iron Man David's metal palm. Small, thumb-sized, sturdy vials filled with the Emperor's blood were clearly presented in front of everyone. Astartes, what is your duty? At this moment, the first company captain of the Lamenters, driving his power armor, stepped forward and roared. He first bowed slightly towards Iron Man David and Primarch Luo Sha. Then, he carefully and cautiously took the precious holy object from the other party's palm. Rumble. In the next moment, everyone, including the stormtroopers, suddenly drove their power armor and knelt on one knee, gradually emitting a deafening sound of metal collision. Devote ourselves to the Emperor's will. Everyone roared in unison without hesitation. Astartes, what is the Emperor's will? The first company captain of the Lamenters, speaking again, turned forward holding the Emperor's blood. The only 4 chaplain brothers in the 2 companies of Lamenters also drove their power armor and quickly greeted him. Fight to the death. Everyone wearing metal helmets roared in a low voice once again. Astartes, what is death? The first company captain of the Lamenters, constantly chanting, walked to the front of the first battle brother. He lowered his head and glanced at the other party who raised his helmet, and raised his hand to gently place a sturdy vial containing the Emperor's blood in the outstretched ceramite palm of the other party. In the next second, the 4 chaplain brothers also slowly stepped forward, and they branded the purity seal that they had already prepared on the battle brothers' thick shoulder armor. Death is our duty. At this moment, whether it was the Astartes of the Lamenter's company or the stormtroopers, they roared without hesitation. The first company captain of the Lamenters also took the opportunity to walk to the next battle brother. Astartes, what is your duty? Devote ourselves to the Emperor's will. Astartes, what is the Emperor's will? Fight to the death. Astartes, what is death? Death is our duty. As everyone's increasingly fanatical and firm low roars. Every Astartes and stormtrooper was given the Emperor's blood and the purity seal. Especially the stormtroopers who were shrouded and immersed in this solemn, and extremely passionate atmosphere of death. Although they have not become true Astartes. But they will also shoulder and exercise the heavy responsibilities of the Astartes. After all, the Chaos Blessing is coming, and no one can stay out of it. Whether it is the stormtroopers or the Astartes, they will be the first and last line of defense for mankind against terrifying disasters. Dong dong dong. Luo Sha, driving the vibranium power armor, walked in the underground passage leading to the circular plaza. As he continued to move forward, the width of the passage also kept increasing. When Luo Sha arrived at the entrance of the circular plaza, a brand new space with a diameter of 5 kilometers and a height of 1 kilometer was presented in front of him. Except for the Emperor's statue located in the center of the plaza and the Pharos lighthouse in front of the statue that had not changed, the rest of the location had basically been rearranged by Iron Man David. Moreover, not only has the usage area been expanded several times, but also under those unremarkable metal floors and surrounding walls. It is full of hair-trigger melta-bombs and twin-linked automatic turrets that can fire laser beams and solid bullets. In addition to the existence of those mind-controlled legions that always remain in a state of slumber around. It can be said that this is the most terrifying place for the defense force of the Gemini Island base. At this moment, Luo Sha, with a solemn expression, drove the vibranium power armor and walked to the front of the Emperor's statue. He slowly knelt on one knee and began to silently pray to the Emperor. When Luo Sha raised his head and found that the Emperor's statue did not move, he didn't care about it. Instead, he took a deep breath and directly opened the simulator page. With the slight movement of Luo Sha's fingertip, the Chaos God's sacrifice page once again appeared in his field of vision. Now, the Slanesh, whose holy number is the smallest and respects 6, is about to reach the end of the countdown. Slanesh's blessing, individual or group, if it doesn't descend on the Gemini Island base, according to the local customs and habits, I'm afraid Europe and America are the top priorities for Slanesh's blessing, right? Luo Sha, squinting his eyes, thought secretly. Just as Luo Sha's thoughts were constantly turning and he was quickly thinking. Ka. The entire Chaos God's sacrifice page suddenly underwent some strange changes. At this moment, all the sacrifice pages seemed to be completely alive. The Tzeentch's sacrifice page material gradually turned into a spiral pattern like blue crystal, which would cause a terrifying effect of dizziness after looking at it for a long time. The Khorne's sacrifice page turned into a bronze color intertwined with layers of blood rivers, and yellowish skulls from countless races were inlaid in every corner. The Nurgle's sacrifice page gradually grew with incomparably gorgeous flowers and vines. But if you look closely, you can see the dirty swamp and decayed bones revealed under the vines. And the Slanesh that Luo Sha was most concerned about. Her sacrifice page turned into a vivid substance like human skin. Every slight tremor and wriggling would present countless naked figures of men, women, old and young. Hiss. However, just as Luo Sha, who took a deep breath, was planning to concentrate. When relying on strong willpower to resist the whispers of the four gods. Rumble. In an instant, the Golden Throne page, which was originally not together, suddenly emerged from the sky above the simulator. Heavily landed in the middle of the Chaos Four Gods sacrifice page. Immediately afterwards, a strange and dramatic bizarre scene gradually unfolded in front of Luo Sha. The Tzeentch's sacrifice page, like a blue crystal maze, quietly approached the Khorne's sacrifice page, as if it was conducting some kind of negotiation and transaction. Close black lens bracket. I don't know what the two sides said, but in short, the Khorne's sacrifice page, which was constantly trembling with layers of blood rivers and yellowish skulls, immediately rushed towards the Slanesh's sacrifice page, whose holy number was about to end, with full of anger. Rumble. As the terrifying collision occurred between the two sacrifice pages, the sacred numbers of both sides instantly returned to perfection and completely solidified. Just as Luo Sha frowned slightly at the bizarre scene that was happening in front of him, Luo Sha suddenly noticed that the Golden Throne page belonging to the Emperor had approached the Khorne and Slanesh's sacrifice pages at some point. In the next second, Khorne and Slanesh, who had completely calmed down because the sacred number had returned to perfection, actually crashed into the Tzeentch's sacrifice page together, and successfully turned the other party's countdown back to its perfect appearance. At this moment, on the sacrifice pages of the three Chaos Gods, their own sacred numbers have completely solidified. Only on the sacrifice page of Nurgle, flowers and vines continue to grow and bloom, while slowly accelerating the countdown speed of the sacred number. Finally, the sacred number representing Nurgle completely returned to 0. The mode of blessing also stagnated on the group option. Emperor, oh Emperor, are you tricking me or are you doing it for my own good? At this moment, Luo Sha, who widened his eyes slightly, subconsciously clenched his back molars. He stared at the simulator page, almost roaring word by word in a low voice. To be honest, Luo Sha was not afraid of the blessings of the other three Chaos Gods, whether it was a group or an individual. But only the blessing that belongs to Nurgle. It is quite troublesome to target, and once it is not handled properly, it can be said that it will leave endless troubles. South Asian subcontinent, Uttar Pradesh. A gaunt, dark-skinned man was pedaling an old, battered bicycle along a muddy, broken dirt road. On the rusty rear rack of the bicycle, a large package, almost half the man's height, teetered precariously under the restraint of ropes. The gaunt man was named Johann, a landless farmer who had lost his ancestral land due to the coercion and enticement of the village's wealthy. Being of a lower caste, he had no choice but to leave his native village and seek work in a nearby city to support his family. Johann was honest but not foolish. He knew from the start that he couldn't protect his land. He could only try to get more monetary compensation from the wealthy. Moreover, Johann, being of a lower caste, was already accustomed to this feeling of helplessness. His only concern was for his hard-working wife and young son at home. Therefore, Johann gave all of the meager compensation to his wife to support the family and embarked on the difficult road of migrant labor alone. Today was the first week after Johann left home. Having taken temporary leave, he had specifically purchased a large quantity of near-expired food from a cheap supermarket, as well as candy he had promised to buy for his son and a silk scarf for his wife, and was now on his way home. Splatter. One of Johann's feet had to step into the muddy dirt road full of cow dung to maintain the overall balance of the bicycle. He shook his head and smiled wryly, finally deciding to get off the bike and walk. In fact, there should have been a clean and sturdy cement road in the village. However, after the village chief's son bought a high-powered off-road vehicle, there was never any news of road construction funds from the state. Not only Johann, who was honest and simple, but everyone in the village knew the inside story. But in order to survive, they really had no good way to deal with it. As time passed, Johann, who was gradually approaching the village entrance, blinked his eyes suspiciously. Usually at this time, Old Jay, who sold crispy ball specialties at the village entrance, should have been the busiest person. After all, a fried dough ball filled with chickpea puree and dipped in various masala-seasoned green sauce was unforgettable, cheap, clean, and hygienic. Johann, whose stomach was lacking in oil, swallowed a mouthful of saliva unconsciously. He quickly took a deep breath and pushed the heavy bicycle forward. Before long, he saw Old Jay's product counter, which was piled up with a few large stones. However, at this moment, the glass box filled with fried dough balls on the homemade counter was already broken and tattered, and a large number of fried dough balls were scattered all over the ground, but Old Jay and his loyal customers were nowhere to be seen. Has something happened in the village? Johann, his eyes slightly widened, quickly stopped the bicycle. He hurriedly ran to the front of the product counter and squatted down to examine it carefully. These fried dough balls are completely soaked by the rain. I remember this rain started 7 days ago and only stopped this morning, right? Johann, who was slowly getting up, muttered to himself. His expression gradually became serious, and he wanted to turn around and leave. But his wandering gaze inadvertently caught sight of Old Jay's sharp saw blade. Old Jay was also of a lower caste. And according to the unspoken tradition and rules known to everyone, people of lower castes are not allowed to use real knives. Johann pondered for a moment. Then, he picked up the sharp saw blade without hesitation and tucked it behind his waist. The existence of the product counter was Old Jay's life. It was also the only source of income for him to support his family. Old Jay would never allow others to trample on everything he had without doing anything. Therefore, something else must have happened in his village. A fight, a riot, or, squeak, squeak, squeak. Johann, his expression tense, quickly ran back to the bicycle. He pushed the bicycle and rode into the village. He needed to get home as soon as possible to see if his wife and son were still safe. If something truly helpless happened in the village, he would take his whole family to sleep on the streets in the city, so that at least they could save their lives. Johann used all his strength to pedal the bicycle, and his whole body quickly swept through the chaotic streets of the village. The villagers who used to come and go had long since disappeared, and even the annoying dog barks and cow moans of the past were gone. In order to carry out some kind of verification, Johann deliberately detoured. He quickly passed the road in front of the rows of mansions that the village chief and other wealthy people had specially occupied land to build. But he still didn't see anyone appear, only the metal doors that were locked from the inside. Thump. Soon after, Johann, covered in sweat, finally returned to his old house. At this moment, no sound came from this ancestral house, which had experienced decades of wind and rain and barely stood upright thanks to the repairs of his father's generation. Amir, Tina, Johann, flustered, didn't even care about the food on the bike seat. He hurriedly shouted the names of his son and wife towards the house, but he never received any response. Johann, sweat flowing down his forehead, took a deep breath and quickly walked to the front of the door. He gently pushed the door and found that it was not locked. Creak. And as the door gradually opened, faint light from the outside slowly shone into the dimly lit room. Johann carefully peered in and glanced around. He found that the ground near the door and the surrounding furniture were very tidy. And all of this was thanks to his wife, Tina. Although the family lived a relatively poor life, the two of them were not lazy and did not complain about fate. Tina. At this moment, Johann, his lips trembling slightly, suddenly saw his wife lying on the ground by the bed. He wanted to go forward to check whether she was dead or alive. But his human instinct still stopped any action he might take. Because his wife's current state did not look like a living person at all. Moreover, a terrifying smile hung on her wide-eyed, pale face, and her exposed hands and feet were covered with large and small terrifying pustules, constantly flowing out incomparably fishy and foul-smelling green liquid, and even the position of her entire abdomen had swelled up a lot. And Johann clearly knew that his wife was not pregnant again. This should be some kind of unknown disease, right? Or the raging plague that the old people in the village talked about. Johann, who had just suffered a great blow, thought in confusion. Amir. The next moment, Johann, enduring the pain in his heart, glanced around the room again and suddenly saw a small figure squatting facing the corner. And that was his son Amir's small figure. Son, don't be afraid. Dad is back. Tina, what happened to your mother? What exactly happened in the village? In an instant, Johann's concern and love for his son in his heart finally overcame his worries about his wife's decaying corpse and some unknown disease. He rushed into the room without hesitation, and then carefully moved towards his son squatting in the corner. Dad, you're back. Mom is sick. We can't contact you. People in the village are afraid of catching the disease and are unwilling to help us at all. At this moment, Johann, whose mind was completely focused on worrying about his son's safety, did not notice that Amir's voice was a little low and heavy, and even the basic tone of his voice did not change at all. I was very scared and very anxious and sad. I wanted to pray to the gods in the sky for help, as Mom once said. I didn't expect the great gods to actually reply to me. Hearing his son's simple words without any intonation, Johann, whose fingers had just been placed on his son's shoulders, felt his hair stand on end. He just wanted to say something. At this moment, his son, who had been facing the corner, suddenly turned towards him. Johann, who couldn't help but stare closely, took a few steps back subconsciously, and his whole body suddenly trembled. Between his son Amir's swollen and festering arms, a terrifying nurgling, only the size of a human head, with a green, pitted surface covered in viscous liquid, was trying to stretch out a pair of slender little hands towards Johann, and its slightly open blood basin mouth was also constantly making eerie laughter and blurred murmurs. Giggle. Dad. Hug. Thank you all for your support. The Twin Islands base was perpetually overcast. Rows of Thunderhawk transports with vectored thrust engines were primed and ready, their Promethium fuel tanks filled to capacity. They awaited only the order to depart. A flight formation blending cogitator engines and human pilots stood ready to carry the Lamenter's chapter into battle. Meanwhile, inside the brightly lit base command center, Iron Man David, his optical sensors glowing blue, scoured the digital world for critical intelligence. Soon, the massive shipboard spirit Cortana joined him, helping to sift through the vast data streams. Rorschach, clad in his vibranium power armor, the blood scythe and frostfang secured to his power pack, sat silently at a metal round table. The forge heart and an artificer bolt gun hung at his waist. His bronze face, devoid of emotion, betrayed nothing of his inner thoughts. Rorschach's mind was a battlefield of good news and bad. The good news was that only Nurgle's blessings had manifested so far. The sacred numbers of the other three chaos gods remained dormant. It seemed that one god's blessings had to run their chaotic course before the others could begin their descent. This undoubtedly bought Rorschach more time to react and maneuver. However, the bad news arrived swiftly. Rorschach had received no guidance from the Emperor. He had expected a beacon of light, like those granted to the Emperor's champions, to reveal the true source of the chaos blessings once they began. But Rorschach received nothing. He was forced to rely on his own team and resources. From this, Rorschach learned his first lesson. Iron Man David's unparalleled network manipulation skills were not enough to cover every corner of the globe. There were still places on the homeworld beyond the reach of the network. This underscored the importance of agents like Natasha. Thump thump thump. The heavy thud of magnetic boots against metal floors echoed through the hall. Doom, cloaked in dark green, Natasha in her sororitas power armor. And Hawkeye, wearing an augmented exoskeleton and carrying a massive metal bow, appeared before Rorschach. Lord Rorschach, we have received our equipment resupply from Redditus. Has Mr. David located the specific location of the Chaos incursion yet? Doom asked Rorschach softly, having been temporarily recalled from Imperial Heavy Industries. Rorschach shook his head slightly, his expression unchanging. His gaze shifted to Natasha in her sororitas power armor. Natasha, once this is over, your intelligence organization must be fully operational as soon as possible. The team will be called Officio Assassinorum. You will have access to all resources and combat assets. I need to see results immediately after its formation, understood? Understood, Lord Rorschach. Natasha, encased in her power armor, nodded solemnly. Rorschach, Lord, do I have to wear power armor too? It's got plenty of protection, but it'll make me a lot less agile. Hawkeye, sensing the mood, raised a ceramite hand. He called out in Rorschach's direction. Doom may not have made it clear, but the enemies we are about to face are terrifying monsters that spread plagues and viruses indiscriminately. Their true origin lies with a conceptual god, one who embodies despair, stagnation, death, decay, and entropy, the end of all things in the material realm. Although their true form cannot fully manifest in this world, even a fragment the size of a pinhead would be extremely troublesome. Moreover, we have given them too much time to adapt. Most importantly, we have no idea how far these chaos demons have progressed. Also, the power armor is just to give you some peace of mind, it probably won't protect you for long. Rorschach took a deep breath, his expression grave. He spoke slowly to Hawkeye, who stood not far away. However, just as Hawkeye, his expression turning serious, was about to ask more questions. Iron Man David, his optical sensors glowing blue, swiveled his metal head and shouted to the group. My lord, we've found it at last. And not just another possible location like before. The South Asian subcontinent, Uttar Pradesh. As Iron Man David's words faded, Rorschach, encased in his vibranium power armor, shot to his feet from the metal chair. He took another deep breath and said in a deep voice to the others, who had been waiting for a long time. For all mankind, it's time for us to move out. Europe, Latveria. Inside a concealed base nestled in the mountains. Guardsmen of the National Guard, clad in carapace armor and armed with lasguns, stood ramrod straight in neat rows, awaiting inspection by their superiors. Behind them, rows of large transport aircraft, the kind that could be bought on the open market with enough money and resources, were adjusting their positions. They were being loaded with brand new Rhino APCs and large quantities of whirlwind missiles. Latveria was now under military administration. The entire nation had been transformed by Premier Zora into a super machine dedicated entirely to the war effort. Even ordinary citizens had to contribute to the state in order to receive rations far exceeding those of other countries. For example, they could proudly become skilled workers assembling whirlwind missiles or Rhino APCs, or join the logistics teams of the National Guard. At the edge of the base, Wanda, her long red hair now cropped short, wore a dark green military uniform emblazoned with the double-headed eagle. She was diligently using her special abilities to move a stack of extremely heavy ammunition crates. Wanda, why are you using your abilities to move supplies again? Are all those automated servo robots just for show? With a sound like tearing air, Pietro, his form a blur of overlapping afterimages, appeared at Wanda's side in the blink of an eye. Wearing a suit of carapace armor, he was completely different from before, exuding an aura of efficiency and mature masculine charm. Brother, Premier Zora said that I need to use my abilities regularly to master them better. This is the experience of Dr. Doom, the revolutionary who liberated Latveria, in learning sorcery. Oh, right, Pietro, why are all the troops being mobilized all of a sudden? Is there going to be a war? Wanda widened her eyes slightly as she used her powers to gently lower the heavy ammunition crates to the ground. She turned to Pietro and asked, according to the company commander, there are foreign enemies invading. And I'm not talking about a war between countries, we may be facing real monsters. Haven't you noticed that everyone has been issued special hazmat suits? Pietro stared at his sister, his expression serious. Pietro, why don't we sneak away? Premier Zora is very kind to us, and Dr. Doom may become my first teacher, but you have to go to the battlefield. Wanda, her expression filled with hesitation, lowered her voice and said to her brother. Don't worry, Wanda. I'm just a messenger, and the fastest soldier in the whole company. No monster can catch me. Pietro smiled gently. He reached out and ruffled his sister's short red hair and said, all right, I won't chat with you anymore. I have to go now, the company commander is waiting for me to deliver a message. Before Pietro could finish speaking, his figure blurred again, and he vanished from Wanda's sight in an instant. Wanda frowned slightly and glanced around. Once she was sure that her brother had left. Wisps of scarlet energy flickered from her slender fingertips. I have a feeling of unease. I hope Pietro is careful. What was the name of the god that Premier Zora mentioned? Ah, I remember. If you really exist, then I hope you can protect my brother as well. 4. For the Emperor. The roar of the displacement engine faintly penetrated the metal bulkhead, reaching the dimly lit interior of the cabin. At this moment, Roche was discussing specific plans to deal with the Chaos invasion with Doom and others. Because the local situation was unknown. Therefore, Roche needed to personally lead an elite team to delve in temporarily and investigate the real situation there. If the speed and area of chaos spreading were still within a controllable range, then, aggressive methods such as Astartes aerial assaults and whirlwind missile bombardments could be used to resolve all problems as quickly as possible. However, if the speed of chaos spreading far exceeded expectations, then Roche and others would have to use witchcraft charm or coercion to forcibly obtain regional command authority. Even contact more external support forces, establish a huge isolation zone at the fastest speed, and use scorched earth tactics to prevent chaos from continuing to spread. In fact, Roche had already notified Tony and Thor, who also belonged to the Inquisition. They should also be on their way to the South Asian subcontinent. Soon after, the flight formation that had just entered the Asian Air Defense Identification Zone immediately received an inquiry from the Shield of China. This was because Roche had not allowed Iron Man David to completely block all signals. Although the existence of chaos was not suitable for spreading through the network, he also wanted the local humans to know the truth about the chaos foreign enemy invasion. According to Rock's request, Iron Man David notified the Shield of China of some important news that had been deleted. After a brief disappearance, the reply from the Shield of China immediately demonstrated their distinct style from S.H.I.E.L.D. All action teams of the Shield of China located in the South Asian subcontinent had already launched actions in advance. They would gather in the central state south of the northern state to await the docking of Rock's team, providing free assistance for everyone's actions and political negotiations. In addition, the Shield of China also thanked Roche for the reminder. And Zheng Xian, the director of the Shield of China, deliberately took over the communication channel and informed everyone of one thing. That is, large-scale biochemical protection missions had been launched on the Asian border connected to the northern state, and magical protection forces had also been added. Therefore, Roche did not need to consider issues such as the spillover of enemies, and could concentrate on solving the internal affairs of the South Asian subcontinent. Dong dong dong. Along with the continuous roar of the engines, several Thunderhawk transport aircraft slightly reduced their flight altitude. In the next moment, metal giants wearing power armor quickly jumped down from the inside of the cabin one by one. Pairs of magnetic boots also heavily stepped into the depths of the moist soil. Whir! Along with the sound of the dark green cloak sliding. Doom, whose silver power armor slightly reflected light, also slowly landed on the ground. Everyone immediately checks the sealing condition of the metal helmets and power armor, and reports immediately if there are any problems. Heavy firepower squad checks the number of flamethrowers and whirlwind missiles. At this moment, Rorschach, wearing a metal helmet, casually picked up the blood scythe. Without turning his head, he commanded the people scattered around in a deep voice. Doom, Natasha, and Hawkeye, plus a heavy firepower squad from the Lamenter's First Company, temporarily formed this elite team to investigate the spread of chaos. As for the other Thunderhawk transport aircraft, under the guidance of Iron Man David, they quickly flew towards the border between the northern state and the central state. The temporary command center would be quickly established there. And the action team of the Shield of China would also provide necessary assistance there. Doom, you and I will lead the way, the others follow behind, deal with any situation first and report later. Rorschach, who quickly issued the order, activated the vibranium power armor. He and Doom launched a fast-paced movement towards the front. Soon after, a medium-sized town still shrouded in a faint mist gradually appeared within the scope of everyone's goggles. Open Black Lens Bracket. The novel app that has been running stably for many years is comparable to the old version of the book-chasing artifact. Old bookworms are using the source-changing app, Close Black Lens Bracket. Rorschach first waved his vibranium palm towards the people behind him to make everyone vigilant. Then, he and Doom looked at each other through their metal helmets. Be careful. Don't worry, Lord Rorschach, I have already prepared. In the next moment, the two people unhesitatingly activated their power armor. Quickly launched an investigation into the town. And Rorschach, who had just stepped into the town, noticed through his goggles. Many vehicles of all sizes were randomly placed on the narrow and dirty streets, and even the surrounding shops and stalls did not show any signs of being cleaned up. It seemed that overnight, the humans in the entire town had disappeared out of thin air. And the lives they were still living remained at the moment they just disappeared. The puzzled Rorschach and Doom advanced a distance in two different directions. But they never saw any trace of human existence. In fact, even the large number of plague carriers or plague ghouls that Rorschach had imagined did not appear even one. Doom, what's the situation on the street you chose? At this moment, Rorschach, who slowly stopped his pace, asked Doom through the communication channel. Lord Rorschach, it's very strange, there is still no one here, and I just tried a prophecy through witchcraft, but the content fed back to me is that they are here and not here, even everywhere. Wait, I seem to have seen something flash by. At this moment, Doom's voice suddenly disappeared from Rock's ears. Doom, stand by. Rorschach, who had just opened his mouth to reply, suddenly turned his metal helmet. While he quickly activated the vibranium power armor to launch a charge. One by one, the metal 10 rings filled with purple light immediately detached from his thick arms and launched a continuous and fierce bombardment towards the nearby buildings. Rorschach, who was worried that the local humans would have an accident when they first came into contact with Nurgle demons, did not even have time to choose other directions. Instead, he charged straight towards Doom's location in a straight line. Rumble, along with countless bricks, tiles, and metal fragments constantly flying. Rorschach, whose whole person was like a steel train, forcibly penetrated a dozen buildings, crossed several deserted streets, and successfully arrived at Doom's location. Then, he saw Doom standing in the center of the street, intending to launch an attack. 9 o'clock direction. Doom, whose metal helmet did not move, seemed to sense Rock's arrival. He stared at the front through his goggles and roared in a slightly hoarse voice. And Rorschach, who had just stopped his heavy pace, immediately turned his head to look. But he instantly saw a group of at least hundreds or thousands of rotting cattle slowly revealing their terrifying figures on the narrow streets. Looking around, the incomplete human heads growing on the swollen and rotten cow bodies also turned around with the sound, squeezing out a seemingly honest smile towards Rorschach and others. What the hell is this? Localized chaos demons. Rorschach, wearing a vibranium helmet, couldn't help but widen his eyes and muttered word by word. In the next second, the master-crafted bolter filled with ammunition had been gripped tightly in his palm, and he pulled the trigger violently. Boom boom boom. One after another, explosive rounds erupted with violent roars, tearing through the thin mist. Accompanied by spiraling trails of fire, they detonated spectacularly upon the bloated bodies of the rotting bovine horde. At that moment, Doom, witnessing Nurgle's demons for the first time, completely recovered from his psychological shock. Whir! As the edges of his dark green cloak fluttered in the wind. His entire heavy frame clad in silver power armor lifted slightly off the ground. As a ceramite-clad hand moved back and forth, countless hellfire flames were successfully summoned by sorcery, rapidly engulfing the terrifying bloated bovine horde. Da da da. Instantly, hundreds upon thousands of bloated bovine creatures, covered in countless rotting human heads, fully reacted. They swiftly lowered their disgusting, horn-twisted heads and launched a terrifying, earth-shaking charge towards the two figures in front. Thump, thump, thump. Just then, accompanied by a continuous series of heavy footsteps, the heavy weapons squad, bearing cyclone missile launchers atop their power packs, as well as Natasha and Hawkeye, having heard the roar of the explosive rounds, immediately revealed their towering figures at the edge of the street. Compared to the mortals who temporarily fell into shock and disgust upon seeing the true form of Nurgle's demons, the Astartes from the Lamenter's chapter were more cold and ruthless, and had long been accustomed to the existence and appearance of chaos demons. Clank! Two Lamenters clad in speed pattern power armor immediately knelt on one knee, preparing to launch the cyclone missiles from their power packs. The remaining three Lamenters unhesitatingly raised the bolters in their hands and squeezed the triggers fiercely. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. In the next instant, the howling roar of the cyclone missiles also brought Natasha and Hawkeye back to their senses. Hawkeye, abruptly activating his power-assisted armor, swiftly retrieved a large metal bow casually crafted by Leman Russ from behind. His ceramite hand slightly raised, 3 explosive fragmentation arrows were already knocked swiftly onto the bowstring. In a flash, with the aid of his optical sights, Hawkeye slightly adjusted his shooting angle and casually released the taut bowstring. The 3 explosive fragmentation arrows, following the newly launched cyclone missiles, crashed violently into the center of the bloated bovine horde. As if to alleviate the tension of facing monsters, Hawkeye, wearing his metal helmet, suddenly turned his head. He shouted loudly to Natasha, who was beside him, continuously pulling the trigger of her bolter. Nat. This bizarre scene always gives me the feeling of being back in Budapest. What did you say? Budapest. It seems we have completely different impressions of that place. Damn it, that damned monster is actually giving me an alluring smile. Die. Disgusting monster. For Rogel Dorn. For the Emperor. At this moment, Natasha, wearing her Sister of Battle helmet, was slightly stunned after hearing Hawkeye's words. But she immediately took advantage of the gap in reloading her bolter ammunition and roared without turning her head. Rather than saying that Natasha truly believed in the Emperor at this moment, it would be better to say that she was using this familiar battle cry to alleviate the repression and panic in her heart. Thump, thump, thump. Just then, perhaps because the bolter ammunition, which was pouring down like a rainstorm, was about to run out. Or perhaps because Natasha's unintentional shout of, "For the Emperor," deeply touched the Astartes. In short, 5 Astartes from the Lamenter's chapter quickly stowed away their bolters and cyclone missile launchers. They casually raised their power swords made of Antarctic vibranium or roaring chainswords. Then, without hesitation, they launched a terrifying combat charge towards the remaining small number of Nurgle's bovine demons. Buzz, buzz, buzz. And Leman Russ, standing at the forefront of the entire squad, abruptly raised his hand and waved it. One after another, metallic 10 rings shimmering with purple light, nested onto his arms like homing birds. In the next second, the blood scythe, with its green light lingering on its sharp blade, was once again held in his palm. His magnetic boots forcefully stomped on the concrete ground, and his entire towering frame also charged towards the Nurgle's demons in front. Shush, shush, shush. In an instant, a close-quarters melee scene that was far more cruel and violent than the bolter fire was presented before Natasha and Hawkeye for the first time. Countless rotting human heads and fragmented limbs flew in all directions. Occasionally, even Nurgle's bovine demons with intact limbs were easily lifted up by the Astartes, powerful physical strength, constantly rolling and crashing heavily onto the ground. At the same time, Doom, hovering in midair, spread his 5 ceramite fingers. Streams of impact beams precisely shot at the large heads of a large number of Nurgle's bovine demons. As his other ceramite hand waved and gestured, endless hellfire completely burned the surrounding rotting corpses. Not long after, just as Natasha and Hawkeye were watching the battle with surging emotions, wanting to truly join this bloody battle and fight bravely, Leman Russ, who had just led 5 Astartes to completely cut through the entire bloated bovine horde, waved the blood scythe casually. Without hesitation, he chopped off the heavy head of the last Nurgle's bovine demon. Doom. Collect air and soil samples. Remember to use both scientific and sorcerous isolation methods. Do not collect flesh samples of this never-before-seen chaos demon. To prevent chaos contamination, just keep the image data. Heavy Weapons Squad. Quickly search the entire town, and if you find any survivors, even children and women, kill them all without exception. At this moment, Leman Russ, standing in place with the blood scythe in hand, issued a series of orders to the surrounding people in an orderly manner. Doom, whose dark green cloak's edges fluttered gently, quietly landed. He casually took out several finger-sized transparent test tubes from the storage space below his power pack. He collected air and soil samples separately and sealed them tightly. And quickly summoned wisps of hellfire to wrap around the mouths of the test tubes as a second layer of protection. At the same time, 5 silent lamenters Astartes immediately launched a search operation throughout the entire town, not easily letting go of any corner. Natasha, Hawkeye, how are you? Can you adapt to this level of combat? Just then, seemingly noticing the 2 mortal comrades slowly stepping forward, Leman Russ, wearing his vibranium helmet, slightly rotated his optical sights and asked the 2 people. In the past, the stormtroopers always told me that their duty was to fight against monsters and traitors threatening humanity. I didn't quite understand. Although I knew that there were some strange things in this world that were difficult to explain with scientific common sense, I never thought that one day I would face them personally. Lord Leman Russ, have you become accustomed to this? Natasha, wearing her Sister of Battle helmet, asked Leman Russ softly with a tone of emotion. Heh, you really get used to it after killing a lot. Leman Russ chuckled in a low voice. He shook his vibranium helmet and said faintly. Just then, Hawkeye, whose observation ability was meticulous, suddenly asked Leman Russ. Lord Leman Russ, Mr. Doom is burning the remaining demon corpses and any traces of fighting on the ground. Is this some kind of virus or plague that can cause terrifying mutations in the human body or flesh creatures? I can only say that this is just one form of expression of chaos demons. The most terrifying place is actually here. After being silent for a while, Leman Russ slowly raised a vibranium hand. He gently tapped his vibranium helmet with one finger. Gradually, a very crisp metallic collision sound was emitted. Physical contamination can be cleared and resolved by various means, but we are powerless against the contamination and corruption of the soul and mind. Do you think that the Astartes believe in the Emperor because of the influence of religious factors? If you peel away the appearance of those complicated things, the real reason is that they have to do so. And this is one of the terrible and hateful aspects of chaos. Chaos, compared to the Tyranids, orcs, or even the space Necrons who are sleeping soundly, is the real and present danger to the Imperium of man. And among them, the most troublesome are the chaos demons of the plague god Nurgle. After all, Khorne likes head-on, real sword real deal combat, and can completely afford to lose. The petty Tzeentch can't afford to lose. But even if he loses, he can only say that it is part of the grand plan. Slaanesh generally doesn't bother ordinary civilians. The higher the status and power of humans, the greater the danger factor. Only Nurgle, whether spreading plagues or creating chaos demons, the degree of harm to ordinary civilians is simply beyond measure. Half an hour later, after a wide-ranging search of this nameless town by the Astartes, a conclusion was finally reached. That is, the entire town, with at least 1 million people, has almost completely disappeared. And whether they have become Nurgle's walking corpses or have been turned into localized chaos demons by some kind of plague, such as Nurgle's chaos bulls. This is not good news for Luo Sha. You need to know that the position where they jumped down from the Thunderhawk transport was just located in the border area where the Northern Territory is close to the Central Territory. Everyone has not yet penetrated into the hinterland of the Northern Territory. Such a serious situation has been encountered. Then it means that the follow-up reconnaissance operations are not optimistic at all. Soon after, the reunited crowd quickly left the streets of the town. Doom, wearing a dark green cloak, summoned a large number of hellfires for the last time, successfully igniting the buildings of the entire town. Afterwards, everyone who fell into a state of complete silence seemed to only have the idea of rushing to investigate. There is no longer any intention to talk and communicate. At the same time, Luo Sha also learned from the communication channel the important news that Iron Man David and S.H.I.E.L.D. had successfully made contact. He unhesitatingly informed Iron Man David, "Let the people from S.H.I.E.L.D. conduct the highest level of communication with the local government departments. Build a quarantine zone on the border of the Northern Territory that is enough to resist for a period of time as quickly as possible. All the resources and money spent will be the sole responsibility of Iron Man David. Moreover, arrange for Redditus to transfer the entire Smart Control Legion and tens of thousands of automatic servo robots from the Gemini Island base as soon as possible. The Latverian National Defense Force guards must also set off as soon as possible. If the local government departments are unwilling to cooperate due to various factors, then everything afterwards will need to be dealt with by Luo Sha and the others themselves." About several hours later, the crowd who had just finished searching a dilapidated village was taking a short rest. Luo Sha once again received a notification from Iron Man David through the communication channel. Although the local government departments are timid and greedy, but they also know that there must have been a huge change in the Northern Territory that they cannot control, and expressed their willingness to cooperate to a certain extent. However, Luo Sha and the others still need to show necessary evidence. They can have the confidence to convince the superior departments. So, after thinking for a while, Luo Sha immediately ordered Doom, "Send the video data recorded in the helmet goggles to Iron Man David as it is." In just a few minutes, Iron Man David, with a slightly playful mechanical voice, reported to Luo Sha again. Many people in the local government departments were frightened to death by the image data of Nurgle's demons. Many corpses have been harmlessly dealt with by the Lamenters. And a person in charge of those teams of S.H.I.E.L.D. said to Iron Man David categorically, "S.H.I.E.L.D. Director Zheng Xian is about to arrive at the temporary command center. If there are no unexpected circumstances, all the power of S.H.I.E.L.D. will cooperate 100% with this mission. Mortals, you won't shed tears until you see the coffin, but it's a pity that Chaos Demons won't reason with you." Luo Sha, who had disconnected the communication channel, shook his vibranium helmet slightly. He murmured mockingly. He could also imagine the kind of thing that Iron Man David said about mortals being frightened to death. Either it was really an accident caused by the authenticity of the image data, or Iron Man David used the Lamenter's First Company's powerful force to carry out a certain degree of suppression. However, this is not without any benefits. At least when everyone carries out the scorched earth tactics later, no one or force will dare to object. And soon after, seeing that the surrounding sky was gradually dimming, Luo Sha and others decided to continue to penetrate into the hinterland of the Northern Territory to conduct extremely important reconnaissance operations. At the same time, Doom has also contacted a Thunderhawk transport. Once the reconnaissance team is surrounded by Chaos Demons, they need to quickly withdraw from the battlefield hinterland. Boom boom boom. The roar from the bolter once again resounded through the dark night sky. As Luo Sha and others continued to penetrate, countless newly transformed Nurgle's walking corpses took advantage of the night's cover. They began to appear one after another in the range of everyone's helmet goggles. Luo Sha, who was experienced in battlefield, immediately led everyone to carry out kite tactics. Strive not to let the terrifying number of Nurgle's walking corpses completely block everyone's retreat. Doom, immediately ascend into the air to check the surrounding area. I found that these Nurgle's walking corpses don't seem to be blocking our retreat. They are more like preventing us from continuing to move forward. At this moment, Luo Sha, who was controlling the metal 10 rings and the blood sickle to charge back and forth to kill the Nurgle corpse tide, suddenly stopped his heavy footsteps. He suddenly turned his vibranium helmet and shouted loudly in Doom's direction. Understood. Doom, who casually threw a handful of hellfire, immediately rose rapidly into the night sky. In the next second, Doom's deep voice resounded through everyone's communication channel. With me as the center, at the 12 o'clock direction, about 7 kilometers away, there is another large town with a not small scale, and a large amount of fire and black smoke is constantly rising inside. It seems that a casting factory has just been built. Astartes, charge and clear the way for me. After hearing Doom's words, Luo Sha, who reacted quickly, immediately waved his vibranium palm at the 5 Lamenters company Astartes. The Lamenters, who received the Primarch's order, drew out their power swords and chainswords without hesitation. They began to launch a continuous and terrifying charge in the direction pointed out by Doom. And Natasha and Hawkeye, who have gradually adapted to fighting demons, also waved their power swords and metal great bows, and tried to keep up with the pace of others and rushed forward. Rumble. However, just as everyone had just escaped the encirclement and interception of countless Nurgle's walking corpses, just about to approach the entrance of the large town street, accompanied by bursts of deafening engine roars and dazzling green fire. In an instant, living motorcycles completely covered with a large amount of rotten flesh quickly appeared in everyone's helmet goggles. Demon engines. Rumble, rumble, rumble. In an instant, the surrounding crowd didn't even need Roach to issue an attack order. They unhesitatingly pulled the triggers of the bolters in their hands. So many days of fighting side by side had allowed them to develop a great deal of tacit understanding. Doom, his dark green cloak edges fluttering violently, once again ascended into the dark night sky. His 10 ceramite steel fingers quickly straightened downwards. Incredibly brilliant beams of energy continuously bombarded the Defiler demon engines that were roaming back and forth, attempting to launch an assault. Due to the almost non-stop reconnaissance and combat missions of late, Doom's warp energy reserves were also nearly depleted. Therefore, he had to abandon his most proficient sorcery. Instead, he began using the many technological weapons on his power armor for fire support. As for the mortals Natasha and Hawkeye, whose nerves were already numb, even though the bolter ammunition carried inside the power armor had already been exhausted, they still tried their best to use the flamethrowers they carried to spray flames as much as they could. Rumble, rumble. At this moment, the 5 Astartes of the Lamenter's first company, driving their speeder pattern power armor, knelt on one knee. They cleanly fired off the last round of whirlwind missiles, completely engulfing the charging Defiler demon engines in a sea of explosive fire. The Lamenters, rising abruptly, casually threw the remaining bolters and flamethrowers on their bodies towards the 2 mortal agents. Then, they unhesitatingly drew power swords or chainsaw swords with roaring teeth from their waists. They roared in unison, launching a terrifying charge towards the Defiler demon engines that were constantly emitting mechanical roars. For those we cherish, we uphold honor in death. Buzz, buzz, buzz. At the same time, accompanied by the Lamenter's angry battle cry echoing across the battlefield and the crisp buzzing sound of metal 10 rings colliding, Roach, tightly gripping the blood scythe and furnace heart in his hands, also quickly activated his vibranium power armor. His magnetic boots forcefully stomped on the damp ground, and he charged towards a Defiler demon engine that had just arrived, like a steel train. Change source app. In an instant, the sharp blade surrounded by green light flicked slightly upwards. This Defiler demon engine, which had no time to change direction, was completely split in two by the blood scythe in Roach's hand. The next second, the furnace heart in Roach's other palm also suddenly ejected plasma spheres outwards. Almost in the blink of an eye, it completely melted the Defiler demon engine that had not yet fallen into wisps of ash and smoke. Immediately afterwards, metal 10 rings filled with purple energy were summoned by Roach. Like a dense storm of bullets, they continuously swept towards more Defiler demon engines. Dong dong dong. At the same time, the 5 Lamenters, wielding power swords and chainsaw swords, and brazenly activating the jet propulsion of their speeder pattern power armor, also crashed head-on into more than a dozen Defiler demon engines like a fleet of crazed dump trucks. The next second, when power swords that activated cerulean disruption fields, or chainsaw swords with spinning teeth, were frantically wielded. The Astartes, heavy iron fists covered in ceramide armor, also struck any moving target that approached their attack range with unparalleled swiftness. About 15 minutes later, the entire hasty engagement relied on Roach's and the Astartes' extremely terrifying offensive posture, as well as the constant support from Doom and the 2 mortal agents. Successfully annihilated nearly 100 Defiler demon engines, which were only the size of motorcycles. Don't relax. The Nurgle zombie tide is taking the opportunity to surround us again. Doom, immediately call for a Thunderhawk transport. Just then, Roach, casually waving the blood scythe, slightly turned his vibranium helmet. He carefully stared at the outer space of the town shrouded in the night with the aid and capture of night vision goggles. Then, he heard the sounds of ghoulish howls rising and falling. So, Roach issued an order to Doom without turning his head. And just as Doom nodded vigorously, about to contact the Thunderhawk transport, Roach, whose attention was attracted by the large amount of firelight emanating from inside the town, immediately led the rest of the group towards the interior of this large town. However, apart from those Defiler demon engines that first appeared, there were no traces of Nurgle zombies revealed within the goggle range of Roach and the others on the chaotic streets. If compared to the Nurgle zombie tide that was gradually surrounding the periphery of the town at this moment, the number of zombies inside this large town could simply be described as sparse. This also made Roach and the others, who were desperately hacking and slashing at Nurgle zombies, feel suspicious once again. In the countless towns and villages they had passed through before, the complete disappearance of humans could be explained by the large number of Nurgle zombie tides. Then where did the humans in this large town go? Merely manufacturing 100 Defiler demon engines wouldn't consume that many humans, right? However, after Roach, driving his vibranium power armor, took the lead in killing all the surrounding Nurgle zombies, forcibly charging into a huge foundry with fire and black smoke soaring into the sky, he almost subconsciously widened his eyes hidden behind the goggles, and instantly understood the true purpose of the disappeared humans. Rumble rumble, accompanied by the terrifying roar that even the vibranium helmet could not completely isolate. Inside one demon forge after another, built from the countless mortal flesh and bones, power armor frames that had just acquired basic shapes were slowly rising from a large amount of viscous, bubbling green slime, and were constantly moving forward with the flesh production line connected to the demon forge. At the same time, near the high-temperature ground of one demon forge after another, each one was about 3 meters tall, with a rotten and swollen appearance like a chaos spawn that had failed to ascend. But Roach was 100% certain that it was definitely not the same thing. A terrifying flesh bed seemed to be using the flesh essence of countless mortals to gestate twisted humanoid objects that were as tall as Astartes, and even had horns growing on their heads. Astartes. Chaos Astartes. At this moment, Roach, whose gaze was fixed on the horrifying scene before him, almost roared with gritted teeth. Even the Lamenters and the 2 mortal agents who had been following behind him were shocked. If the Lamenters were shocked because they knew the notorious traitor legions and what they had done in the past, then Natasha and Hawkeye did not react for a moment because of Roach's roar. Lord Roach, can these monsters also create Astartes? At this moment, Hawkeye, holding a metal longbow, asked a trace of doubt in everyone's heart on behalf of Natasha beside him. Heh, I should have thought long ago why Nurgle, who doesn't fight or snatch, became the ultimate victor of this blessing, because only his chaos power can complete this life creation that can be called a miracle. Damn it. Tzeentch, who squeezed out the other chaos gods, was acting from the beginning. He did it on purpose. The zombie plague raging in the northern states. Completely localized chaos demons. Or those useless Defiler demon engines. These are just appetizers prepared by the other party for the local humans, or rather, for me alone. It is also a blindfold to confuse our response thinking. Using the flesh essence of countless humans infected with a mysterious plague as the basic material for making the flesh body of Chaos Astartes, and then cooperating with quickly produced demon equipment and countless Nurgle zombies as cannon fodder. I even suspect now that the most damned green fatty has successfully descended the soul consciousness of the Death Guard Legion. And this used to be a method that I and the Emperor specifically used to deal with them. Roach, wearing a vibranium helmet, gritted his teeth and muttered in a deep voice. His ceramite steel palm quickly yanked downwards from the bottom of the power pack. A melt-a-bomb that was always carried with him had already leapt into his palm. Battle, brothers. In this battle, even if the entire Lamenter's company is completely wiped out, even if the team fights to the last man, we must desperately stop the conspiracy of chaos from succeeding. Roach's voice had not completely dissipated as he turned his gaze. The 5 Astartes present instantly clenched the melee weapons in their palms. They stepped forward without hesitation. For the Emperor. For the Primarch. For the blood of Sanguinius. For those we cherish. All Lamenters, death is without regret. Border between Madhya Pradesh and Uttar Pradesh. At this moment, autonomous servo robots were rapidly leveling the loose ground around them. Without any sense of fatigue, they continuously built temporary metal prefabricated houses to store important supplies. Further away, between the planes, several newly completed temporary airport runways were constantly receiving large transport planes. Once those large transport planes had just come to a stop, and the cabin doors were successfully opened. Rhino armored personnel carriers with heavy armor and Latvian National Guard troops quickly began deployment and reorganization operations. The successful arrival of their first company was just the opening music of this large-scale war. Soon after, a squadron of Thunderhawk transport planes, once again returning to the airspace above the temporary command center, hovered in a low position. The next second, 50 Castellan robots, with broad shoulders carrying Hellfire lascannons, landed heavily like meteorites. The booming sound of countless dust and gravel splashing up also drew exclamations from more humans. Among them were agents from S.H.I.E.L.D., as well as many administrative personnel from local government departments. But even more shocking scenes were yet to come. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Accompanied by the roar of engines as dozens of Thunderhawk transport planes turned around and left again. The last massive mechanical creation, towering 5 meters tall, also suddenly rushed into the air and crashed heavily towards the ground. Judging from the silver vibranium skull exposed on the outside, it was none other than the miniature Night Titan personally controlled by Tech Priest Reditus. What are you looking at? Have you never seen such a majestic mechanical creation before? If you keep staring, I'll turn you all into servitors. At this moment, Reditus, who had just landed, slightly shook his most conspicuous silver vibranium skull. The eye sockets also suddenly emitted a terrifying red light outwards. Immediately afterwards, the deep mechanical voice, clearly amplified by a sound amplification device, instantly resounded throughout most of the temporary command center. And although the constantly gathering crowd did not know what servitors were, as agents or government officials, their basic ability to observe words and expressions still allowed them to successfully regain their lost sanity and continue to busy themselves with the important tasks at hand. Clack, clack, clack. The next moment, the satisfied Reditus quickly activated the transformation function of the miniature Night Titan. He then controlled it to transform into a tracked form in cog mode, and sped off towards the direction where Iron Man David was located. A few minutes later, Reditus, who was vaguely chanting prayers through the vocal device, successfully found Iron Man David inside a large metal prefabricated house. And right next to him were Tony, wearing gold-red armor with a very serious expression, and Thor, who was heavily surrounded by several autonomous servo robots and was working hard to put on the 6-armed Iron Knight Terminator. Aha, long time no see, pointy beard, did the electricity-wielding Big Oaf come too? The many teams outside are quite lively, giving one the illusion of returning to the old home. David, is Primarch facing a tough opponent? At this moment, Reditus, who was obviously much taller than everyone else, looked down at the crowd from a high position. He greeted the others in a relaxed tone. Then, his red glowing gaze focused on Iron Man David. An hour ago, the Lamenter's first company had already set off on foot with a large amount of ammunition, supplies, and heavy firepower weapons. Once the Taurus assault vehicles carried by the second batch of flight squadrons arrive, the Lamenter's second company will also quickly attack. They will join our Lord and become the first line of defense to snipe the enemy. According to our Lord's request, the second line of defense is the National Guard, temporarily formed into an armored infantry regiment. They will use a large number of flamethrowers to advance inch by inch, trying to eliminate the plague infection while surrounding the Lamenter's companies in a circle. The third line of defense is the Intelligent Control Legion. The reason they are not at the forefront is to use these mechanical creations to quickly build a 10-meter-high metal isolation wall on the border of Uttar Pradesh, first to prevent internal survivors from escaping by chance, and second to prevent outsiders from entering again. This matter has been personally negotiated by Jung Xian, the director from S.H.I.E.L.D. As for whether the other party can succeed, without specific data, I am not sure. However, the backup plan is to use mind control witchcraft to forcibly take over the command of the entire region after Doom returns. At this moment, Iron Man David, who had no intention of paying attention to Reditus, slightly shook his metal head. With blue light flashing in his eye sockets, he concisely explained the upcoming action plan to Tony and Thor, who were listening attentively not far away. Wait, David. Didn't Roche say at the beginning that this was just an unknown force leaked from a conceptual chaos god, which caused the walking corpse plague? If the enemies are just some mindless zombies or flesh monsters like chaos demons, do you need to go to such great lengths? Tony, with a slightly furrowed brow, suddenly raised a hand covered in armor. He asked Iron Man David with a solemn expression. At least that was the case last night, but judging from a flesh-forging factory that our Lord just destroyed, this chaos god has given us a taste of our own medicine, and he may have also brought the soul consciousness of a chaos Astartes warband to this world. The specific situation still needs our Lord to communicate with you in person. Iron Man David, slightly shaking his metal head, explained to the people in front of him without hesitation. By the Omnizeia. David, what did you just say? Chaos Astartes. At this moment, Reditus, who had been listening quietly, interrupted before Tony and Thor could speak. He shouted in alarm towards Iron Man David. Then what are you waiting for? Quickly nuke the area with high-yield nuclear weapons. If the reserves in the base aren't enough, I can handcraft them for you on the spot. Reditus, shut your mouth. However, at this time, Iron Man David, who had always been relatively calm, suddenly turned his metal head. He stared straight at the servo skull with his cold, blue glowing eyes, and said with a hint of anger in his mechanical voice. Do you think that I and our Lord have not discussed this method? Do you know how many humans exist in Uttar Pradesh alone? The registered population alone is 210 million. Do you also know that Uttar Pradesh is the second largest grain-producing area in the South Asian subcontinent? Dropping a nuclear bomb is very worry-free, and even the Astartes companies and the National Guard do not need to make many sacrifices, but what about the large number of survivors inside who are still stubbornly resisting chaos? What about the subsequent secondary disasters caused by nuclear radiation, which will cause a large reduction or even a complete loss of grain production in the area? Also, Reditus, don't you really know that according to the legal provisions of the Imperium of Man, any person in charge who proposes and uses the exterminatus order will be held accountable and executed afterwards? At this moment, facing the relentless questioning from Iron Man David, the usually eloquent Reditus was left without any words of rebuttal. Speechless, it could only manipulate the tracked Micro-Knight Titan to squat casually in the corner of the room. Instead, it diverted more attention to the specific movements of the Intelligent Control Legion. Although this was Reditus's first real participation in a large-scale team operation, its combat experience and methods of handling matters were incomparable to those of Iron Man David. Therefore, it would continue to be its technical priest, occasionally making a cameo as a super firepower support platform. Seeing Reditus completely settled down, Iron Man David, with blue light flashing in its eye sockets, turned its metallic head. It continued to discuss more detailed plans with the serious-faced Tony and Thor, who was wearing 6-armed Iron Rider Terminator armor. From the current situation, The power and resources that Rorschach could mobilize were already considerable. Some normal medium and small countries could be quickly flattened without suffering much loss. Even against the major member states of the United Nations Security Council. Abandoning siege warfare and instead using mobile guerrilla tactics. Both the Astartes and the stormtroopers could create a huge trouble that would be difficult to deal with in a short period. Unfortunately, what they were facing now were Nurgle's demons, not human official organizations that could be negotiated with. Especially the appearance of Chaos Astartes like the Death Guard. Further strengthened Rock's determination to wage a large-scale hard battle. This hard battle not only referred to the first fierce confrontation between the Lamenter's chapter and the Death Guard, but also to the continuous torment of Nurgle's plague on the people of this region. If it became absolutely necessary, the Astartes, bolters and the Imperial Guard's lasguns might even have to fall on countless civilians. Because against chaos, sacrifice was the only way. Thud, thud, thud. On the rough and hard asphalt ground. Heavy magnetic boots continuously stamped out clearly visible footprints. Also driving the power armor, like a metal giant, to rush forward continuously. At this moment, Rorschach, wielding the blood scythe in his palm, and 5 Lamenters in speed pattern power armor were penetrating deep into the heart of the northern province alone. A dozen hours ago, Natasha and Hawkeye, 2 mortal agents whose physical and mental willpower had almost reached their limit, had temporarily evacuated the war zone. Doom himself did not want to leave. But he still obeyed Rock's orders and went to the temporary command center. To help Iron Man David integrate the subsequent offensive forces and handle more problems. And Rorschach, who had completely let go, also worked tirelessly. He personally led the Astartes squad to break through countless Nurgle zombie encirclements in succession. They quickly raided 4 large towns and completely destroyed more flesh-forging factories. At the same time, Rorschach and others also obtained more clues and important information as a result. The bad news was that Rorschach had almost no hope for the survival of countless local civilians. With the current number of Nurgle zombies and the degree of changes in the surrounding environment, whirlwind missile carpet bombing was already the best outcome. If necessary, those firestorm catalysts that Redditus left in the Gemini Island base had found new uses. Of course, there was also good news. Perhaps the other party did not expect Rorschach, as a Primarch, to attach so much importance to the Chaos invasion. Or perhaps Nurgle's power also had times when it was unsuited to the environment. In short, the speed at which the Chaos demons tried to create Chaos Astartes out of thin air was far behind the speed at which Rorschach completely destroyed one flesh-forging factory after another. However, Rorschach, who had fully entered a state of war, did not have any luck mentality. If there were no unexpected circumstances. In the true heart of the northern province, such as the capital city of Lucknow, which had the largest population, the terrifying figures of Chaos Astartes must have already appeared. Temporarily stop advancing, everyone rest in place for 15 minutes. At this moment, Rorschach, who was driving the vibranium power armor and running continuously, abruptly stopped his magnetic boots. He suddenly turned his head and issued an order to the Lamenters behind him. And the Astartes immediately drove their power armor to find some surrounding cover. Then, they quickly knelt on one knee to check the wear and tear of their melee weapons, and also recovered their greatly consumed physical strength as soon as possible. At this moment, Rorschach, who glanced left and right at the surrounding environment, did not detect any danger. He raised a vibranium palm and gently tapped the side of his helmet, making a crisp collision sound. "David, I have sent you the direction of our advance and the current coordinates. Immediately notify the company commanders of the Lamenters chapter and have them rendezvous with us as soon as possible. Also, how is the situation at the command center?" And Rock's low voice had just fallen, when Iron Man David's mechanical voice sounded in his ear. "My lord, the coordinate information has been sent. The Lamenters chapter, who have already boarded the Taurus assault vehicle, will soon arrive at your location. Mr. Doom, who has returned, has just finished the many procedures of quarantine and repeated disinfection, and has joined the communication meeting with the local official departments. That shield. Director Jung Xian has also helped us a lot. I believe that the final result we want will appear soon. The Intelligent Control Legion has already launched engineering missions under the leadership of Redditus. Moreover, thanks to the resource support from SHIELD and the local officials, we can completely use large cargo containers to set up this isolation line. According to my data calculations, the entire northern province can be surrounded within approximately 72 hours. Currently, the reorganized Imperial Guard is also cooperating with the Stormtrooper Company to slowly advance inch by inch into the interior of the northern province with flamethrowers according to your requirements. However, this method has been strongly resisted by the local official departments. Even if the real image of the Chaos Demons is placed in front of them, they still believe that the economy and benefits after the end of the war are the most important, and our actions are undoubtedly destroying the future of their nation. Hey, we have been rushing forward all the way, and we have now approached the heart of the northern province, but we have not seen any survivors who can communicate verbally. Even the desolate plains outside the towns are almost all Nurgle zombies. After hearing Iron Man David's words, Roche, who could not help but sneer, said without hesitation, "The future. David, you can tell everyone clearly that as long as the pollution of chaos is not completely eradicated, not only the South Asian subcontinent, but even the humans of the entire Terra have no future to speak of. They want to win this war without paying any price. There is no such good thing even in dreams." The communication between Rourke and Iron Man David quickly ended, as Iron Man David had countless matters to handle and implement. In a way, the significant responsibilities shouldered by others in the team were no less demanding than Rourke's, who was fighting on the front lines. After a very brief respite, the habitually silent group once again activated their power armor and quickly embarked on the path of continued combat. Strategically, it might have been a better choice for Rourke to wait in place for the Lamenter's chapter to meet up and join forces. However, Rourke, unwilling to see more chaos Astartes successfully birthed, wished he could be in countless places at once. He yearned to instantly destroy all the flesh-forging factories and incinerate the countless Nurgle demons into ash. Alas, Rourke, not being an alpha-level psyker, could only rely on his bolter and power sword, along with the countless warriors loyal to him. Under the protection and gaze of the Emperor of Mankind, he would personally extinguish the small tendrils of chaos that had manifested. Approximately several hours later, as the sky darkened once more, the group, having completely entered the heartland of the northern wastes, encountered a Nurgle zombie horde of considerable size head-on. When Rourke, wielding the blood scythe, spearheaded the battle as the combat team's tip, leading the relentlessly fighting Astartes through the entire Nurgle zombie horde, they were quite surprised to find that these Nurgle walkers did not engage them excessively. Previously, they would have had to run dozens of kilometers or completely wipe them out to resolve the pursuit issue. Moreover, the reassembled Nurgle zombie horde seemed to be guided in a specific direction, continuously advancing forward. Rourke, wearing his vibranium helmet, carefully scrutinized the situation through his visor for a while. After inquiring about the Lamenter's thoughts, Rourke decided to temporarily follow this Nurgle zombie horde for a distance to assess the specific situation. If they could unexpectedly find more flesh-forging factories used to create Chaos Astartes, it would be a cause for celebration. Therefore, Rourke and the Lamenters quickly activated their power armor. They patrolled the periphery of the Nurgle zombie horde, preventing any disturbance to the horde's direction of advance, while using this extremely valuable time to recover their depleted stamina. Soon after, Rourke, standing on a barren hill in his vibranium power armor, seemed to have figured out the true purpose of this Nurgle zombie horde. If Rourke was not mistaken, the Nurgle zombie horde seemed to be reinforcing a certain location. Since it was a reinforcement, it meant that the Nurgle walkers had suffered significant losses, indirectly proving that there were still many survivors and a certain degree of resistance within the northern wastes. "Come on, battle brothers, we have work to do again." Rourke, his thoughts racing, turned his vibranium helmet and said calmly to the Astartes who were taking a brief rest. In fact, if the Astartes currently accompanying Rourke were from the Carcharodon's chapter, he might not have immediately tried to rescue the survivors. Instead, he would have chosen to attempt a rescue operation along the way while carrying out an important mission. This is not to say that Rourke was cold-blooded and ruthless, but that the Astartes of the Carcharodon's chapter were inherently unsuitable for similar tasks. Moreover, Rourke, as a Primarch, would gradually be attracted and influenced by the chapter's culture and fighting style if he stayed with the Astartes of a particular chapter for a long time. Rather than saying that the Primarch's actions influenced the Astartes' style of action also influenced the Primarch's actions at the same time. Especially for Rourke, who had no bloodline descendants, he might truly become the gene father of countless Astartes, even indirectly influencing those Astartes who had turned traitor and rebelled. Dong, dong, dong. Rourke, driving his vibranium power armor, led the Lamenters forward at full speed. They gradually overtook the Nurgle zombie horde, getting ahead of them. Soon after, under the cover of the pitch-black night, a small town, naturally elevated and heavily surrounded by a large number of Nurgle walkers, gradually appeared within the range of everyone's visors. At this moment, the intermittent and intense gunfire, as well as the mixed screams and shouts of humans and Nurgle walkers, continued to spread, gradually echoing beneath the night sky. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Rourke, wearing his vibranium helmet, unhesitatingly gripped the blood scythe in his hand. He casually released the metal 10 rings binding his arms, and then quickly led the Lamenters in a continuous charge and slaughter against the heavy zombie horde in front of them. Chi, chi, chi. Rourke, driving his vibranium power armor and charging forward, bisected countless Nurgle walkers with each swing of the blood scythe. At the same time, the metal 10 rings, howling like a metal storm, also minced more Nurgle walkers into a sky-filled rain of viscous meat paste. At this moment, for Rourke or the Lamenters, the numerous Nurgle walkers posed no serious threat at all. The only things they needed to be wary of were their constantly decreasing stamina and the continuous wear and tear of their melee weapons. However, just as the combat squad, with Rourke as the spearhead, delved deep into the heart of the Nurgle zombie horde, a plague emperor, wielding a curved blade covered in green slime, with a bloated body and a festering face always maintaining a bright smile, successfully approached Rourke's position under the heavy cover of countless Nurgle walkers. Close black lens bracket. However, before the smiling plague emperor could raise the curved blade in his hand to launch a sneak attack, Rourke, abruptly turning around in his vibranium power armor, didn't even bother to look. A casual punch instantly smashed the plague emperor's upper body into bloody fragments. Everyone, be vigilant. There are plague emperors here. Rourke, quickly shaking his vibranium helmet, roared without turning his head. Nurgle's plague emperors are chaos demons who voluntarily or were forced by the torment of disease to embrace Nurgle. They are more threatening than the cannon fodder that simply turned into Nurgle walkers due to infection with terrible plagues, and are one of the primary targets that everyone needs to kill. The next moment, he continued to forcefully wield the blood scythe in his hand, desperately slaughtering the continuously surging Nurgle walkers, opening a path forward for the Lamenters behind him. At the same time, the survivors, who had used countless building materials to almost completely surround the entire town, seemed to have noticed the tall figures of Rourke and the others. Unfortunately, limited by their own abilities and the power of their firearms, they couldn't help much and could only continuously emit urgent cries. Rumble. However, not long after, accompanied by heartfelt cheers from a large number of surviving civilians and a series of extremely heavy footsteps, a green giant, about 3 meters tall, with a body covered in strong muscular contours, suddenly leapt from the inside of the town into the air. Subsequently, the giant, like a green meteor falling from the sky, launched a terrifying impact on the heavily surrounded Nurgle zombie horde. Hulk, attack, rumble, accompanied by a deafening crash. 2 enormous green feet slammed hard into the ground. As countless rocks and dirt exploded outwards. The terrifying shockwave that followed swept out in all directions, sending countless Nurgle zombies flying. In an instant, the Hulk, eyes wide with rage, unleashed a wild barrage of punches and kicks upon the swarming enemies. Within a mere few dozen seconds, all the Nurgle zombies within 100 meters were scattered into the air like rag dolls thrown into a blender. Rumble. Then, as if finding the clearing speed of mere punches and kicks too slow, the Hulk, once again opening his massive maw, unleashed a terrifying roar. And began using air shockwaves, created by clapping his enormous hands together, to unleash a highly efficient and savage slaughter upon the continuously swarming Nurgle zombies. This method of attack, relying entirely on unparalleled physical strength, quickly cleared a wide path through the teeming Nurgle horde, leading directly to Roach and his companions. Hulk! Smash! Hulk! Make way! Hulk! Go! At this moment, Roach, piloting the vibranium power armor and wielding the blood scythe and metal 10 rings, turned his head. He clearly heard the Hulk's roar, which seemed to echo across the entire battlefield. Follow me, the big green guy is an ally. Roach, after slightly shaking his metal helmet, unhesitatingly activated the heavy magnetic boots. He immediately began sprinting towards the Hulk, who was rampaging through the Nurgle horde. Hearing Roach's command, the Lamenters also activated the speed-enhancing jet propulsion of their power armor without hesitation. They charged forward, wielding melee weapons in their hands, closely following the Primarch Roach's footsteps. Dozens of seconds later, the group successfully traversed the Nurgle horde and converged with the Hulk. Hulk, clear the way immediately. Roach, his voice low, first slightly shook his vibranium helmet towards the Hulk. Then, tilting his head back, he shouted loudly at him. The Hulk did not understand politeness. He simply grinned mischievously at the metal giants before him. Then, without hesitation, he unleashed an unstoppable and terrifying charge towards the town, completely blasting open a path forward for those following behind him. At this moment, if the Hulk's sudden appearance had brought Roach some unexpected help, then what Roach inadvertently saw next shocked even him beyond words. As the group continued to advance, some plaguebearers within the Nurgle horde, their faces constantly displaying smiles, stealthily approached the Hulk and seized the opportunity to launch sneak attacks on the rampaging giant. However, each time rusty blades tainted with Nurgle's plague heavily struck the Hulk's rough green skin. The chaos marks that had just begun to form on his body were completely washed away by a completely unknown and mysterious power, as if they had never existed. In fact, similar situations had occurred before. Many mortals or Astartes who were sufficiently devout to the Emperor had experienced miraculous manifestations. It was not difficult for them to resist chaos corruption with their flesh and blood. But Roach had never sensed any psychic power fluctuations from the Hulk. And the Hulk certainly wouldn't know about the Emperor's existence. So, did this mean that there was a great being, beyond Roach's knowledge and even beyond his ability to perceive, helping humanity fight against the forces of chaos? It should be known that the native world was never an ordinary and mundane universe. The countless superhumans now blooming everywhere were enough to attest to this point. Perhaps, even without Roach and the Emperor's existence, if the Chaos Gods unexpectedly invaded the native world, they might not necessarily be able to successfully gain a foothold. Dong dong dong, accompanied by the shouts and cries of a large number of civilians. The Hulk and Roach's group, one after another, leapt up from the seething Nurgle horde. They crossed the makeshift city walls, which were several meters high, and then landed heavily inside the town. Before Roach, who had just retracted the metal 10 rings, could explain their identities and origins. A large group of civilians wearing hand-sewn, simple protective suits and holding disinfectant sprayers quickly swarmed around them. Thus, Roach, wielding the blood scythe, the Lamenters, and the snarling Hulk had to open their arms, allowing the disinfectant liquid to wash away the blood and minced meat from their ceramide armor and flesh. After every corner of their power armor had been repeatedly washed several times, another group of civilians carrying simple flamethrowers appeared around them. They began to disinfect Roach and the others, as well as the ground, with high temperatures. At that moment, Roach had originally felt a bit surprised that these mortal survivors could quickly detect the many weaknesses of Nurgle's plague. However, when he subconsciously turned his head and saw the big green guy casually snatching a can of disinfectant and rinsing his mouth with a silly grin, he instantly understood. The Hulk was somewhat savage and simple-minded. But the other personality hidden inside this massive body, Dr. Bruce Banner, was not a simpleton. Hello, Hulk, my name is Roach. I am leading my team members in a large-scale war to eliminate chaos corruption. I am here specifically to save you survivors. At this moment, Roach, his mind racing, activated his vibranium power armor and stepped forward. And with his subconscious action, the surrounding ordinary civilians immediately scattered like startled rabbits, completely hiding away. Helpless, Roach took a deep breath and had no choice but to ask the Hulk, who was not far away. Hulk, can you let Dr. Bruce Banner come out for a moment? How did you guys get to the South Asian subcontinent? And how did you become the protectors of this town? I think I have many questions that need to be answered now. Hulk, don't like Banner. Hulk, is hero. Hulk, protector of town. However, the Hulk, who had just been foolishly playing with the disinfectant sprayer, seemed to have been touched on a wound he didn't want to mention. He suddenly turned his large green head. His small eyes, flickering with light, stared fixedly at Roach, who was wearing vibranium power armor, and roared in a strained voice. Okay. Bad Banner. Stinky Banner. We won't talk about Banner anymore. At this moment, Roach raised his hand to stop the Lamenters from wanting to step forward and protect their Primarch. He patiently comforted the Hulk as if he were facing an Ogryn with very low intelligence. And perhaps sensing the kindness emanating from Roach. The Hulk, who had been surging with anger, gradually calmed down, and even lowered his head slightly. Close black lens bracket. However, just as Roach wanted to ask again, the Hulk, whose body seemed to have undergone a slight change in an instant, suddenly raised his head again. His small eyes, which were obviously deeper and wiser, fell on Roach and the others with great suspicion. In my opinion, you're not some kind of hero team, this kind of power armor. Are you from the Terra Astra Militarum? Could it be that the situation in the outside world has deteriorated to the point where it needs terrorist support? Inside the town, heavily surrounded by Nurgle's walking corpses. Beneath the pitch-black night sky, a large handmade kettle was gently placed upon a pile of burning firewood, the flames radiating intense heat. One of the green giant's massive hands was carefully crushing coffee beans of indistinguishable color with its coarse fingers. At this moment, having just removed his vibranium helmet, Roach allowed wisps of steam to rise and evaporate from his short, gray-white hair. He leaned against the side of a ruined wall, powered by his vibranium armor. His indifferent gaze, betraying no emotion, was fixed on the green giant before him, who called himself Professor. According to the giant's self-introduction, he was neither the Savage Hulk nor the true Bruce Banner himself. Instead, he was a new personality that had been unexpectedly triggered and fused in order to cope with the Chaos invasion. Neither I, nor the Hulk who hates Banner, would dare to let Banner himself show his true form easily. After all, the human body is still too fragile, especially in the face of such a chaotic situation. It's best to be cautious, wouldn't you agree, Mr. Roche, Coffee? At that moment, the green giant professor, whose every gesture seemed filled with scholarly elegance, looked up at Roche and said in a calm tone. I don't particularly like the bitterness of coffee. Clean, plain water will suffice. Roche, slightly raising an eyebrow, glanced at the green giant's coarse fingers crushing the coffee beans. He couldn't help but shake his head slightly. Subsequently, Roche, propelled by his vibranium power armor, stepped forward and sat directly beside the fire. So, it was you, Professor, who discovered the means to deal with this chaos plague and taught those ordinary citizens how to disinfect and prevent it. How many survivors are there left in the entire town now? Mr. Roche, you should be asking how many people are left in the entire Northern Territory. Upon hearing Rock's question, a heavy gloom and regret flickered in the green giant professor's wise eyes. He spoke in a very somber tone to Roche. When I wandered into this small town half a year ago, there were about 300,000 people here. Now, although there are no statistics, there should be less than 50,000 left. Do you see those zombies outside the town? On the 7th day of this terrible disaster, approximately 2/3 of the town's population, who had initially only shown mild symptoms, transformed into those mindless, terrifying corpses. If Banner's emotional fluctuations hadn't been so intense that they triggered my emergence, I'm afraid not a single living person would have remained. But other towns and cities, or the countryside where many civilians reside, probably won't be so lucky. I can tell you that they are infected with the walking corpse plague, a terrifying plague randomly spread by a chaos god who controls concepts such as life and decay, and this is just the most insignificant of the countless plagues concocted by him. The next moment, Roche, after considering for a moment, revealed to the green giant professor some secrets related to the battlefield situation. Upon hearing Rock's words, the green giant professor nodded subconsciously. He reached out from the pile of debris beside the fire and found several dust-covered cups, sighing as he said, "No wonder many of the potions I temporarily concocted have lost all effect on the zombified humans. Is it because of this ancient, unimaginable entity that is causing mischief? In fact, I initially thought that this disaster was caused by a biochemical weapon virus released by an evil company or organization specializing in biochemical weapons. There is something I hope you don't mind, Mr. Roche. I even suspected your Terra Astra Militarum Legion. After all, the massacre you orchestrated back then was too cruel and shocking." The Green Giant Professor gazed at Roche with a hint of apology. Roche remained unmoved upon hearing the other party's words. He simply said in a calm tone, "It's not a big deal, I've long grown accustomed to it. Moreover, we are indeed not a team of soft-hearted heroes, so it's unavoidable that we create such a stereotypical image for outsiders. By the way, the coordinates of the town we are currently in have already been sent out. My support team will arrive here soon, and all the survivors will basically be safe. I mean, under the circumstances that they can pass quarantine and screening. What about you, Professor? Do you have any specific plans?" At that moment, the Green Giant Professor's expression gradually became serious, and he stopped the small movements he was busy with. The countless rising mists made the other party's huge body appear slightly hazy. If the Savage Hulk were to answer your question, his answer would definitely be very simple, and that is to find the instigator of this disaster and smash his head to pieces. Although the Savage Hulk is childish and easily angered, he is indeed the kindest and most righteous personality among us. And if it were Banner himself, he might try to find a way to research potions or technological devices to eliminate the many plagues, trying to heal the suffering of countless civilians without causing conflicts between the various parties. Banner is, after all, a scientist, not an incredibly powerful warrior. However, as Professor, even though I have inherited Banner's scientific thinking and knowledge, I also barely know how difficult it is to fight against a conceptual god. To be honest, I am more curious about how you will quell this disaster, and how many people are willing to help you." The Green Giant Professor threw the question back to Roche with almost watertight meticulousness. Roche, without the slightest hesitation, patted the expertly crafted bolter hanging at his waist with a vibranium hand. He continued in a low voice, "Bolters and chainswords have always been a good way to fight against chaos, and the only path that countless humans have explored with their lives. This war has mobilized nearly 60% of my combat forces, and these loyal warriors will use everything they have, even their lives, to face the enemy of chaos. And my combat objective as the team leader is to preemptively confront the advanced combat power created by chaos. So, whether you are the Savage Hulk or Professor Banner, are you interested in joining me in this war? For the sake of those who have died, or for the sake of continuing to wander in peace, Mr. Roche, I don't think I can find a reason to refuse you." At that moment, the Green Giant Professor held the huge kettle with countless scalding vapors rising from it firmly in his green hand. He quickly rinsed a water cup with hot water. Then, with a solemn expression, he handed a cup of steaming plain water to Roche, who was sitting opposite the fire. Roche, with a calm expression, accepted it without hesitation. He narrowed his eyes, gazing at the Green Giant Professor's massive fleshly body, and slowly squeezed out a fleeting smile from the corner of his mouth. Then, "Welcome to temporarily join my team, Bruce Banner. For more thrilling fanfiction stories like this, check out my channel Fanfic audiobook. Dive into epic adventures, mysterious realms, and legendary journeys brought to life through immersive storytelling. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing audiobooks.